Hello, everybody. This is Jonathan Lack, host of the Weekly Stuff podcast. And before Sean Chapman and I started doing this show regularly in 2012, we actually had a different podcast called The Monthly 10, which was an extension of my blog at the Denver Post's Your Hub at the time. Now, this was way back when we were still in high school, and we're still very much learning the ropes of podcasting and, life. These episodes are not available online anymore, and as long as I am alive, most of them will not be. But there are a couple that connect to various topics we've covered over the years, like Doctor Who, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Ones we've even referenced a couple of times on the show, especially in Doctor Who conversations. And I am taking those episodes out of the vault, dusting them off, and presenting them here on our YouTube channel to fill out and complete some of our playlists. The audio quality isn't great. The people you're about to listen to are not experts about anything at all, but it might be worth some fun. You'll see. This is the Weekly Stuff from the Vault.
Hello and welcome to the Monthly 10 podcast for April 2011, Part 1. We're coming to you live from inside the TARDIS because this is a Doctor Who celebration.
Is this the part where I say it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside?
This would probably be a good time to establish that.
Okay, yeah, it's bigger on the inside.
That's what we love about the TARDIS.
That and the
Travels through space and time.
and space. I mean, everything travels through space, so why not even specify that? It travels through time. That's the
There
important
are some time machines that do not travel through space.
Yeah, but you can travel through space.
That's true.
Okay. Now that we got that out of the way.
I'm Jonathan Lack.
And I'm Sean Chapman.
We're here to give you a Doctor Who rundown in 3 extravagant parts. Yes, because this month, April 2011, marks the return of Doctor Who to BBC One in Britain and BBC America.
In America!
Yep, and it's going to be on the same day, Saturday, April 23rd, just a few weeks away. Are we excited, Sean?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I'm very excited. That's why we're doing all these podcasts. Sean and I are both big Doctor Who fans. We've been planning a big Doctor Who podcast because we love the series, and we just thought it would be a really fun topic for this. And we were going to do it in April because Doctor Who, the show, is returning. And Sean, why don't you tell us why we had to split this into 3 parts?
Because Doctor Who, as a show, is more than 40 years old, and it's been running straight for most of those 40 years, so there's kind of a lot of history to talk about. So
yeah,
covering it in one podcast would be a little ridiculous.
Which is what we were thinking about. And then we were watching a lot of this, and it was like, yeah, it's going to be too much, especially because Sean and I have a talent for getting into Doctor Who discussions that last hours on end.
Yeah, it's going to be very, very tangent-prone, so...
Yeah. It's because, Sean and I do debate together at our school, and so debate tournaments, for anyone who's not in the know listening to this, they're like 16 hours long, and you only debate for about 2 of those, and that leaves at least 14 hours to talk about Doctor Who.
Mm-hmm.
I don't expect these podcasts to total 14 hours, but if they do, it's probably good we split them into 3 parts.
Yeah.
So, that's what we're talking about. But Sean is going to be more or less hosting today's podcast, because Sean's kind of the Doctor Who expert. Sean, you want to tell us about why?
Well, okay, so when I was a kid, like really, really young, when I was staying up late at night, my parents didn't know I was up. I was watching PBS. It must have been PBS. I didn't know what it was, but I remember distinctly watching, and I figured out later what it was, the Doctor Who episode Tomb of the Cybermen from the 60s, starring Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor, as the Doctor. And from then on, like every once in a while, I would pick up an episode of Doctor Who here and there because it didn't air a lot in the States, but it was only on PBS every once in a while, and sometimes the Sci-Fi Channel ran a few episodes. Most of those would be Tom Baker. But then later I decided, when I found out the show came back in 2005 with the revived series, I decided I want to get back into it. But being a huge nerd, and as you know, nerds are massive completists, I had to watch all the show I possibly could, so I went online to dailymotion.com and watched...
Wait a second. I'm going to preface this by saying, my nerd completism was to start with the 2005 revival and go through the end of Series 4, and I felt like a total nerd doing that, and I felt very proud of myself. Now hear what Sean did.
Yeah, no, so I went online. Well, actually, the first thing I did, because I have Netflix instant streaming with the Xbox 360, the first thing I did was went on and found all the episodes that they had on there, put them on my list in chronological order, and I was like, there's no way I can watch all of Doctor Who. Well, I'll watch as much of it as I can in as the comfortable fashion as I could with the Netflix instant streaming. And the earliest episode was the Aztecs from Season 1 with the first Doctor, William Hartnell. But the bitch of it was that the early series, particularly with the first and second Doctor, was that each episode or each serial would begin with the very end of the last serial. So there was never like a starting point where you didn't have any background information. It was always starting sort of in the middle of the story. So I saw the Aztecs, I'm like, okay, I don't want to just jump into this, I'm going to go back with the next one. But then the next one started like that, and the last one after that, until I got to the very first episode. I was like, at this point, I'm just going to watch the entire series, and over the course of a year, that's exactly what I did.
Doctor Who has about 700 episodes now?
Yeah, composed
like
through like more than 170 serials, which are basically like at least 2-hour-long stories.
Yeah. In the preview article I did for this podcast on Your Hub, I said Sean is probably one of the few people in the world to watch every episode, and I'm fairly certain I can say that, because I doubt there are many people who have done that.
Yeah, well, at least especially in America, there's not.
Yeah,
as far as I'm aware, there aren't a lot of us.
No. And I mean, even like the DVD releases in America are, I think, way behind where they are in Britain with the number of classic ones they have out.
I would say so. I haven't really looked into that much.
They're still migrating a lot of them over here. Like, I think they've had the movie one with the Eighth Doctor. Ironically, that was made for like PBS.
No, it was made for Fox.
Okay.
But it was made for America, but it had crap ratings in America, but great ratings in
well, it's been out on DVD in Britain, I think, for years.
Yeah.
Just came out for the first time in America. And I think that is so funny, because that one was made for American audiences, but Britain still got it first on DVD.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Because that was such a horrible idea, and we'll probably get into it later.
It'll be on part 2 of this podcast.
But let's just say that was a horrible, horrible idea, trying to make a TV movie of Doctor Who for America when nobody in America had any idea what Doctor Who was, except for like the 1 million people who actually watched it when it premiered. So
yeah, bad idea.
Fox messed up there.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so Sean's seen all of them. Until we started doing stuff for this podcast, I just watched the Revived series and really fallen in love with that. But we wanted to do a big podcast. So to fit it in with the sort of monthly 10 outline, we decided we would do a sort of pseudo top 10 list. Only there's sort of 11, because there's 11 Doctors. But one of those... well, anyway, so what we're doing for the 11 Doctors is picking the best story from each one.
And let's note that I picked my favorite story, so I wouldn't necessarily say some of these are the absolute best. I picked my personal favorite one.
Right, and so and we kind of pooled our interest for the Revived series where we've both seen them, and then Sean picked the ones for the first 7 Doctors. The 8th, there is only one to pick, obviously. That's why I say pseudo top 10, because there are really 10 we chose, and then the 11th we just kind of had shoved on us.
Yeah.
And then for those first 7, Sean chose those. I've watched them, so I can discuss them on the podcast today. So that's my exposure to the classic Doctor Who, though I've read quite a bit about it. Wikipedia has an insanely detailed Doctor Who section.
Yeah, no, and then I know of at least 3 different separate websites that are basically Wikipedias for Doctor Who. The best one being
oh my gosh.
TARDIS. I think it's like TARDIS.wikia.com.
Oh,
that's a good one too.
Because I just know, like, if you want to read about Doctor Who, not only does Wikipedia have articles about each Doctor, all the music, the show itself, but every single serial or episode, and it is detailed.
And there are also, like, there's one of my favorite things to look at is, like, the lists of what happens in, like, an actual chronological order of fans trying to put every episode into chronological order. And,
they have that?
And expanded universe stories, too. There's this one ridiculous list where this guy, like, literally went through every single thing of Doctor Who he could find. Like, all the short stories, all the comic books, all the audio dramas, everything, and tried to fit them in chronological order. And that's pretty freaking ridiculous. That shows you how big the how rabid the fan base can be for Doctor Who. It's at least equivalent to something like Star Trek. It's basically Britain's version of Star Trek.
Yeah. But it's even cooler because, Doctor Who never did Voyager.
Yeah, that's true. The Doctor Who has some low points, but I don't think it ever got as bad as some of Star Trek did.
Right. So anyway, I guess we're like 10 minutes into the podcast, but we should really quickly probably, before we jump into things, if there's anyone listening to this who isn't 100% familiar with what Doctor Who is, why don't you give them a brief rundown of the kind of history of and what it's about?
Okay, well, synopsis of the show. Doctor Who is about a blue box that's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside that travels through space and time, and inside that blue box is a crazy old man called the Doctor. And whenever he lands, something bad is going on, and he fixes it. And I should give credit. Part of that's a paraphrase from one of my favorite contemporary authors, Neil Gaiman, who's writing an episode for Series 6. That's essentially how he describes the show, so I'm going to give some credit to him.
I was going to say, that's genius, but okay, if it's not yours, that's funny, though.
No.
So, I want to tell a quick story before we get started, because we're talking about, nerdy Doctor Who stuff.
Yeah.
So, we were talking about debate earlier also. Well, I had a debate tournament this weekend before we recorded this podcast that Sean wasn't at, but I was at with another friend of ours named Sam. And it's a Congress tournament, and at a Congress tournament, it's like a mock congressional service, kind of like what senators and congressmen do at the national level, but just in a sort of mock format. And so I have a replica of the 11th Doctor's sonic screwdriver. This is a tool I think the second Doctor invented it?
Yeah, the second Doctor invented it.
Okay. And many of his incarnations have used it for a variety of purposes, but it makes a sound like this, or like this, and it flips open like this. But you can't really see that on the podcast, but it's fun. So I brought it to the tournament, and I ended up making a speech about it because I felt we were about to record this podcast, and I kind of owed it to all Doctor Who fans to get up in front of a bunch of debate kids and make a whole speech about the sonic screwdriver. And I did.
Well, what was what was the speech supposed to be about?
All right, well, so we were discussing a bill that was about creating an emergency relief fund for disasters in the United States, such as like Hurricane Katrina and stuff.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where you put a sonic screwdriver.
Yeah.
Right now.
Oh, it's going to be good. So what I did is when I got up there, I said, "This is a sonic screwdriver." I got it for $20 off Amazon.com. I had a lot of fun with it. It makes these noises, and it's used in the television show Doctor Who by the character the Doctor, who travels through space and time in the TARDIS, which is a blue box, which is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And he uses the sonic screwdriver for a variety of purposes, often for opening doors, but really for anything at this point.
Yeah.
But anyway, the Doctor is a man who, along with his sonic screwdriver in the TARDIS, goes through space and time righting wrongs. He often arrives at disaster sites and is able to fix them because he has the gift of time travel. But we in America do not have the gift of time travel. We are not omniscient like the Doctor. The best we can do is use hindsight to tell us that we need to create an emergency relief fund. So that's how I used the sonic screwdriver in a speech.
Well done, good sir.
Thank you. So that was fun. That was my first speech of the day. People were extremely weirded out by it, I think.
Yeah, that probably set a good precedent so everyone knew who you were.
Yeah. So I'm going
to ignore you from
that point on.
Yeah, from that point on.
They did not. I asked so many strange questions, but that's a topic for another podcast. Anyway, before we move on, I'll be kind of handing the show over to Sean. Today on part 1 of this podcast, we're splitting the discussion into 3 parts. There will be a one next Sunday and the Sunday after that, which is the day after Series 6 will debut, so we'll be reviewing the premiere on this podcast. But today we're going to be talking about the first 4 Doctors and the stories Sean picked for them. And so I'll be passing it over to Sean in a minute, but first some really quick announcements about what's going on over at Your Hub. I will be doing reviews of all Series 6 episodes as they air over on yourhub.com. If you've read my stuff before, I've done this for the TV shows Lost and Terminator, the Sarah Connor Chronicles, and House briefly before it pissed me off so much I dropped it, and currently NBC's Chuck. So it'll be going up on that lineup, Doctor Who, and so that should be pretty fun to review. There's a lot you can write about with that. And in the week leading up to that, I'll also be doing reviews, one each day, for each series of the revived show, kind of to acclimate readers to my thoughts on the series up to now. Only the revived series. It would be like 32 articles if I were to talk about each season of the show.
Yeah, no, that would be
and I'd have to watch a lot. But so those will be going up starting Monday, the week before. I don't have the date. That's like the 18th or something. Actually, I think it is the 18th, Monday the 18th. But it'll all be up on the Your Hub post that's going to go up with this. So look for those dates, and it'll all be supplementing these podcasts and stuff. So now let's pass it over to Sean for the beginning of our top 11 Doctor Who list.
Okay, so Well, of course, we're going to start from the beginning with the first Doctor, played by William Hartnell.
Show started in 1963 with William
Yes.
Hartnell.
And an interesting point, the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, was November 23rd, 1963.
That's your birthday.
I was born on November 23rd. So,
wow, this is destiny, isn't
yeah,
it?
it was destiny. I was supposed to become a massive Doctor Who nerd. But anyways, the story I picked for the first Doctor's best serial, in my opinion, my favorite one, is The Daleks, which is serial number 2 from the first season. And I think this is when the show really took off. I mean, the very first episode was kind of just trying to introduce the concept. With the first episode was An Unearthly Child, like I said, which had the Doctor, which was most about the Ian Chesterton and Barbara Wright, who were teachers at a school, Coal Hill High School, where a student, Susan Foreman, has strange amounts of knowledge. And like in history class, she's saying that she knows stuff and saying that, well, this textbook is wrong. This is not actually what happened in the French Revolution. And so they're very worried about her because she's exhibiting all this very strange behavior. And they go to investigate to find out where she lives. And they find out that her address is actually at a junkyard. And they follow her into the junkyard and they find this police box. And outside the police box is this old man. And later you find out that he's the Doctor. And that the Doctor takes them back in time to 10,000 BC. And they go on an adventure with a bunch of cavemen. So that's the first serial. Then the second serial starts out with the Doctor having to make an emergency jump because they're being attacked by cavemen, and he ends up on the planet Skaro in some unspecified amount of time.
You know, you were talking about how the serials lead into each other.
Yeah.
It's good that you just gave me a recap of An Unearthly Child, because I was going to ask you what was going on at the beginning of this.
Yeah, no, so you see what I'm saying? It's like, it's so hard to watch some of these really early ones where you don't have a point to grab onto. And the reason why they filmed it like that is because back then they didn't really, I think, realize, because home video wasn't a thing, they didn't realize that people would go back and re-watch these things as time went on, which leads to another problem where the BBC junked a lot of these very early episodes that we'll
get into that when we get into
when we talk about the second Doctor. But so this episode starts off with the Doctor when his newfound companions, Ian and Barbara, and his granddaughter Susan. And so I think an important thing to point out here is that this is where the basic format of the show is established, and where early on in Doctor Who, a lot of the time there would be historical episodes, but that got phased out through basically the last purely historical episode, I believe, was in the second Doctor's first season with the episode The Highlanders. And so after that, Doctor Who was purely a science fiction show, but this very early on.
In
the classic series, it was purely science fiction. So they brought back some historical episodes, but there's a science fiction element to all the historical episodes of the revived show.
Right, but there are ones where the science fiction does happen in historical time.
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is that when the BBC designed the show originally, it was meant to be an educational program, actually. And it was meant to be some of the episodes. Basically, I think they originally designed every other episode would have a science point to it, and those would be the science fiction episodes. And then the other episodes would have a historical point and try to teach children about history, which is somewhat questionable if you watch some of the historical episodes, how accurate it really is.
Especially today. Like back then, it probably didn't seem any sort of egregious, but it is today.
But the format of the show is established that the Doctor has human companions with him. And it's actually interesting watching back now as a fan that you can kind of see stuff that they obviously didn't plan for early on the stage, because they had no idea that the show was going to continue with different actors playing the Doctor after he regenerates and essentially gets a new personality and a new body. But you can see how the Doctor as a character sort of develops, that very early on he's this very angry old man that's very hard. He has to have his way, and he's very hard to get along with. And that he's not as obsessed and doesn't like humans as much as he does later on. And I think as a fan, you can sort of retcon this and look at his relationship to Ian and Barbara, showing him how good humanity can be.
When I watched this serial on William Hartnell, that's kind of what I was thinking, is that it was weird at first, but then again, this is the Doctor centuries before, like David Tennant, I guess, in his time.
Yeah.
But so this is, him still advancing and becoming the Doctor we know and end up loving more as the series goes on.
Which, once again, you can't really prescribe to any sort of intention, but it's very interesting that it sort of worked out that way, that how the character developed.
That's how he evolved, and it's natural.
Yeah, it's very natural. And then there's a lot of you can go into a lot of fan stuff speculating about what happened before, like what happened, the initiating event before the Doctor went off and when he stole his TARDIS. And I don't believe any story has actually specifically tackled that event. But so, and then anyways, also at this point early on in the series, the Doctor is actually a renegade because he has stolen his TARDIS from his people, the Time Lords, and so he's trying to escape from them. He can't go back to his home world of Gallifrey, and you don't really know why he stole his TARDIS yet. And eventually he talks about how the Time Lords have this non-intervention policy where they're not going to sort of help people, even though they have this great power, and the Doctor decides that he doesn't want to do that. So he goes traveling through time.
When do you finally learn all that?
In the second Doctor's last episode, The War Games, is actually the first time, I believe...
The Time Lords, right?
Yeah, this is the first time the Time Lords are mentioned, and then later you meet the Time Lords at the very end of the episode, and that's when the Doctor is forcibly regenerated to the third Doctor and is exiled to Earth, but we'll get into that later. So then now to actually talk about the episode, The Daleks, it starts off with the Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Susan going out and exploring this strange new world. This is the first time you see an alien world on Doctor Who, and that Ian and Barbara have been on an actual alien planet. And they find out that they're in this forest, and everything in the forest has been petrified. And they even find this cool little, like, stone iguana thing that's been petrified as well. And this is, like, some of the stuff I really like about Doctor Who is when it's very science fiction-y, and I really like this, like, metal iguana thing, and the Doctor speculates that it uses static electricity to pull its prey in. It's just like, this is some of the stuff I love. And Terry Nation, the writer of this episode, does this a lot in his episodes, where he throws small little random sci-fi things that, honestly, you could make a whole episode about a metal iguana monster that pulls its prey in with static electricity and magnetism. And I think it's kind of cool that they put the science fiction elements in there.
When I got to that point in the episode, I saw that was like realizing that's something they still do, is those little things where the Doctor will realize something scientific like that and explain it away. And you're right, it could be its own story. And it's just cool to see how early on they had things like that in there.
Yeah, no, and it's actually this is the kind of the point of the episode. If you're trying to glean the educational part of the episode, is it tries to teach you about static electricity, and it doesn't. Yeah, no, and we'll get onto that later. It doesn't do it in a particularly good manner, obviously, because I mean, it's not like it's a hit you over the head with a message kind of educational show, but the BBC definitely was definitely intended to put educational elements into it, and so then later, let's go on with what happens with the episode. They're exploring this new planet. And also, something actually to point out I forgot about is that the cliffhanger of the last episode and what opens this episode is that in the TARDIS they have a radiation counter. Something interesting that they don't do anymore in the Revive show. But back in the day, every single episode would start with them, 1, looking out the scanner to find out where the hell they are, 2, looking at atmospheric readings to find out if they can survive in the atmosphere outside, and then 3, looking at the radiation counter. And that they don't do that anymore, probably because it would just slow down the show at the very beginning. But so Susan looks at the radiation counter and is like, "Oh, it's fine, grandfather." Then she walks away, and then the radiation counter goes into danger and starts blinking. Why it doesn't make a noise when it goes into danger, I don't know. It seems like that'd be something good to put on the radiation counter.
That's a design flaw.
Yeah. Also that there's a 5-minute delay before it goes into the red zone. So they leave the TARDIS and all that stuff happens, and then they see in the distance there's this massive city. And this is also a point where I think the Doctor, you get a better feel for who the Doctor is as a character, because in the last episode, they were in threat of being killed by these cavemen for basically the entire episode, so you don't really get a feel for the Doctor in that part. And now that he's not in danger of being killed, you can see his scientific curiosity, and the reason he left being he wants to learn as much about the universe as possible. And he's so insistent upon investigating this city that when Ian basically insists that they can't go because he's putting the entire party in danger, the Doctor pretends and makes up that the TARDIS has malfunctioned by dumping out this fluid link that needs mercury, and saying that they have to go into the city now to refill the fluid link. And so the Doctor has to get his way. And this is something I think you can kind of see the Doctor nowadays doing something like that, but probably not in such an underhanded manner.
Yeah, that's kind of underhanded, but definitely, again, recognizing like how much of the Doctor is there from right at the beginning. His love, he's so curious that he will go to any means to like just learn things. And I think that's always been a part of the character, is that that's like his driving factor, and that's why he puts himself in dangerous situations often.
Yeah.
He is crazy in that way.
And then I also love, I think that's the first time you get William Hartnell's, like, weird, sort of, like, impish laugh, is after he dumps out the fluid link, and he says, we must go off to the city now. And then he, like, kind of steps towards the camera, and he goes, and
I love that. It's so funny.
His laugh is so hilarious. And so anyways, then they go down to the city, and also I love the design of the city in Skaro. It's got this kind of, all the doorways are very small and they're arched, and it's understanding that the Daleks live in the city, in the design of the Daleks, you understand why it's like that. But it's just very interesting.
It looks
design.
Really cool.
And then also, one of the things that they did for the very early on, they don't have special effects like at all. And how they built the set, you can see, is like these hallways that extend basically as far as you can see, and they would basically have a cardboard cutout at the end of. They build a small part of the hallway. Then at the back end, they would have a small cardboard cutout and basically paint on what looks like the hallways all the way at the end.
I couldn't tell that.
Well, I could tell that because of one fatal mistake they made about 5 times in the episode, is that where the characters enter is like right in front of the cardboard cutout, so they cast a shadow vertically on the cardboard cutout. So that's kind of where you can notice.
Yeah, I get that.
It's a little. I mean, it's a very clever way of doing that, especially because with the poor video quality back in the day in black and white, you wouldn't even be able to tell that normally. They wouldn't even have to make it look very realistic. But if you have the actor standing right in front of it, it doesn't work particularly well.
So not very good blocking.
Yeah, no. But with the production schedule, they did the best they could. And if you didn't notice it,
that's across all of the classic Doctor Who I've watched. They make phenomenal use of their very limited resources.
Yeah, the sets on Doctor Who have always been the part that has impressed me the most, even to this day with the Revive series, even though the CGI has gotten very good, just particularly with the last series in the Revive show. But the sets in Doctor Who always have been what have made the show. And the set
believable.
And the set designers, with the limited money and time that they had, even for the entire run of Doctor Who, I'm always amazed, because Doctor Who always was short on money and always had a very short production schedule. I'm always amazed by how good the sets are. Right. Every single episode, it was consistently good, except for one case in the Fifth Doctor's run where they literally had like a week to make an episode because of what the BBC was doing at that time.
We'll get to that next time.
Yeah, with that one exception, the sets always are phenomenal.
So they're in the city, and somebody's going to get captured.
Yeah, well, that's a big trope in classic Doctor Who. But so they split up the party to go looking for this Mercury, and I believe the episode ends with Ian, the Doctor, and Susan all go off in one direction, I believe. And for whatever reason, Barbara goes off on her own because she has to get captured.
Yes, and you see the sort of suction cup of a Dalek.
Yeah, actually, I believe the episode ends with. Yeah. It's a very iconic shot for classic Who that you don't even see the Daleks actually at the very end of the episode. All you see is Barbara's walking down the hallway. She looks to her left and looks basically into a camera lens, and then this expression comes up on her face that she's very terrified, and she backs up against the wall, and slowly the camera moves towards her. And actually, I believe in Series 1 of the New Who, there's a shot that basically replicates that with Rose in the cliffhanger. If you look for it, it's just like, and actually they use the shot a lot nowadays in Doctor Who of this like point of view shot from the Daleks' point of view.
Yeah, I think you see a shadow or something because that shot's iconic, and that you see some part of it.
Yeah, I do believe like there is a small shadow of another Dalek off to the side that you can kind of see.
I don't know if it's a suction cup. It's that thing they have on them.
The ice stock, I think.
Yeah.
Is what you actually see. So I guess now is kind of a good time to talk about the Daleks and who they are.
Right. So this is where we first meet the Daleks, and it is really interesting with me watching the Revived series, where whenever the Doctor meets the Daleks, who are his greatest enemy, and in the Revived series, obviously the history now is that between the classic and Revived series, there's the Time War between the Time Lords and the Daleks, wipes them both out, except the Daleks keep coming back in droves.
And that's something that we can talk about when we get to the end of this one.
Yeah. But, so the Daleks keep coming back, but they're always very afraid of the Doctor. But this is the first time we meet the Daleks. They're not afraid of him, and he's not really afraid of them yet.
Yeah, he doesn't know who they are yet.
Right, so it's very interesting to see this first meeting. But the Daleks, their whole mission in life, or whatever you want to call their existence, is to wipe out every other species. They're much like the cricket men from the third book of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, like...
Only not as funny.
Yeah, the real parallel was made, and this was more when Terry Nation wrote Genesis of the Daleks in the Fourth Doctor's run, was that basically the Daleks became a metaphor for the Nazis, because they are basically the master race. They keep on saying that they're the supreme rulers of the galaxy, and their mission is to eradicate exterminate, I should say, all other life in the universe. And the Daleks are basically the iconic enemy of the Doctor.
Dalek is actually in Britain. It's so iconic. It's a slang word for like jerk.
Yeah.
I've read this, and I think that's amazing because I don't know if we even have anything that iconic that has entered the lexicon that's like a fictional being like that in America.
Yeah, it's like you can't go up to someone and like just call them a Klingon,
right?
And like they'll just like be really, really confused about why you're calling them a Klingon.
Yeah.
In Britain, if you start calling someone a Dalek, they might just punch you out because that's very insulting.
Of course. So in this serial, the Daleks they seem more a little isolationist.
Well, yeah, because
they're not going out and conquering, but they do capture Barbara immediately, and then the Doctor and Ian. And
yeah, well,
Susan.
Because for the Daleks timeline is that I think it's probably like 5,000 years in the past. This is stuff you later learn in this episode, and then is really fleshed out, and actually because you go back and see the beginning of the Daleks in Genesis of the Daleks. But what happens is that there was a massive war between. Originally, they were called the Dolls, but then later the originator race for the Daleks was retconned to be Khaleds instead, because Dolls, it sounds a lot like Thals, which is the other race that was living on Skaro. And
or humanoid.
Yeah, and the Khaleds and the Thals basically looked the exact same in the beginning, and they were locked in a massive war, both of them constantly fighting. The Khaleds were much more scientific-based, whereas the Thals were much more warrior-based. And so they're locked in this massive struggle, and eventually an insane scientist named Davros, for the Khaleds, creates this mutation that he later calls a Dalek, and it's this little kind of squid monster thing that sits inside a big, almost like tank-like shell with a gun and a weird plunger thingy and an eye stalk.
You can tell it's tank-like because in Series 5 of the revived series, when they put the Daleks in World War II, they look right at home.
Yeah, no, that is it is a very interesting design.
Yeah.
When they actually put Daleks in World War II and like kind of put the World War II camouflage stuff on them, and it's like you can see the influence in the design.
Yeah.
It is very, I don't know, 40s-ish.
Yeah.
And so the Daleks are kind of interesting because they can be very terrifying, but they can also be incredibly hilarious because one, it seems like such an impractical design for the greatest race in the entire universe.
They're very limited.
Yeah, because they have this they have a flat base, and the people always made the joke back in the day that the best way to defeat a Dalek is by stairs. But then later you learn out that they can actually elevate and have little...
Elevate.
Yeah, and that the other hilarious part about the Daleks is that they talk in this very monotone voice, and that they're always yelling! And that they always say...
all of them sound identical, too.
Yeah, they all sound exactly the same, and that they're very obsessed with the word exterminate, and every time they want to kill something, they say that they're going to exterminate it. And if there's a bunch of them, they all just start, no matter what's happening, if there's a bunch of them and then one of them says exterminate, all of them immediately just start going, exterminate! Exterminate! And it's so hilarious in some of the episodes just how far that goes. And they did carry it on with the Revive show. Yeah. And sometimes they, like, even other stuff that they say, like, they have a bunch of catchphrases like, my vision is impaired, I cannot see, my vision is impaired, and they'll just, like, yell stuff like that. Constantly.
And here's the cool thing, getting back into this episode, is that almost all of that is there. This is the second serial of the show, the first of the Daleks. They have not changed at all.
Their
really.
Voices are slightly less tinny, and their design is it's basically the same. There's a few little differences, like the light bulbs on their heads are like smaller and stuff. But they are basically the same. They do have the weird behavior quirks that they do later on in the show.
And they have slightly more intelligent conversations in this serial than they later would.
Yeah, no, they do. Well, there is a small group of Daleks that are kind of planning the entire thing.
Right, and unlike lots of classic Doctor Who stories, this one is kind of like a chess game between the Doctor and the Daleks, where they're making kind of limited moves, and then it kind of descends into the, I wouldn't say chaos, but the final sort of standoff.
Yeah, but anyways, before we got onto that, I was talking about the history of the Daleks, and where they are now is after that massive war. I believe it is I think it's the Daleks themselves that actually set off a neutron bomb that eradicates all life, essentially. And that's what petrifies the forest, and that's what creates this massive amount of radiation, is this neutron bomb. And so the Daleks then, believing that the Thals are dead, but the Daleks don't have any sort of space technology yet, because their races had advanced that far, because they were in that massive war, so there was no room for scientific advancement in any other direction. So the Daleks are basically sitting in the city, sitting in massive amounts of radiation, mind you. And so for 5,000 years, they are, like you said, very, very isolated. And this is all before they have this sort of mission to expand beyond the universe, because they don't have that capability yet. And that's why it's so interesting as a fan going back and watching it, is because the Daleks, they're such a small group, because almost their entire race has been killed in that giant war. And I have no idea what the Daleks are even doing, because they have all these, keep on talking about how they have all these sections, and they're in this massive underground city. It's like, what have the Daleks been doing that entire time?
What does a Dalek do for fun? Have they ever answered that?
I don't think so. Run around and say, exterminate? Apparently.
Maybe. They practice their diction.
But so anyways, Barbara gets captured by the Daleks, and then the Doctor, Ian, and Susan find a Geiger counter in the city, conveniently enough, and find out that, they're bathing in massive amounts of radiation.
Yep.
And then they also get captured by the Daleks. And this is where you get introduced... Actually, the first episode is where you get introduced to the classic Doctor Who trope of the Doctor gets captured again and again and again. I don't think, in my memory, there's a single classic Doctor Who episode, like a serial, except for one, Edge of Destruction, where the Doctor doesn't get captured, and the only reason he doesn't get captured in Edge of Destruction is that they never leave the TARDIS in that entire episode.
Does he get captured? No, yes. Yes?
Yep.
What about Wang Chiang?
Yeah, no, at the very end, he gets captured.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's kind of brief, but it's...
Yeah, no, but the Doctor gets captured and imprisoned at least once in every single classic Doctor Who episode. Something to keep in mind. So the Doctor and his companions are all captured, and then the Doctor gets taken in front of the Daleks, and this is the first time the Doctor encounters the Daleks, and it's also
a great scene.
It's so weird to see the Doctor, knowing all the history with him and the Daleks later on, not knowing who the Daleks are, and he's trying to he's just trying to be reasonable and rational, just trying to bargain with them to get the anti-radiation drugs.
Yeah.
That the Thals left outside the TARDIS, but they didn't know what they were at the time. So then later they send Susan to go get the anti-radiation drugs, and then she meets Aladdin, a Thal. And the Daleks had earlier called the Thals horrible mutations, but the Thals are actually just normal human beings, basically. Yeah. And so that's where...
It's convenient when the aliens are just humanoid. It means we have like 3 species in this episode that all look the same. We got a Time Lord, we got humans, and we got Thals, and they look identical.
Yeah, well, I think there are about 5 billion races in the universe that all look exactly like humans.
Yep.
In Doctor Who, but that's okay, and they all have British accents also. Something else to notice. I don't think it's actually a British accent. I think it's like the universal accent, and every other accent is different.
Right.
It's like British is the base accent of the universe. Something else to keep in mind.
Yes. Doctor Who has many life lessons like this.
Yes, it does. So Susan gets these anti-radiation drugs, and Aladdin sends her back with them, with actually an extra stash of them, because the Daleks take the original stash of anti-radiation drugs, but allow Susan to keep a second stash. And she passes them out to the party, and then they decide that they're going to have to try to escape from the Daleks, and that they're going to try to side with the Thals, because they can clearly tell that the Thals are now this very peaceful race of farmers, and that their plateau where they used to farm has been completely eradicated, and now the Thals have to find somewhere else to get food, because all of them are starving. And so then, eventually, this is a very funny scene when they all escape, is that Aladdin gave Susan a cloak, And the Doctor somehow...
I love this.
The Doctor somehow has managed to figure out that the Daleks get their power through static electricity from the floor. And this is where the static electricity comes in. This is where the scientific message is placed in this episode. The Daleks are powered by static electricity. I don't know how
that work.
I don't know how they generate enough static electricity by moving metal against metal. But anyways, they decide what they're going to do is they're going to get the Dalek into the room, get it onto the cloak so it's no longer in contact with the metal floor, so it can't generate the electricity from it, and then the Dalek powers down. But they also find out that somehow Daleks have fantastic peripheral vision. I don't know how.
This is like never comes up again. The Daleks have peripheral vision.
Well, it's countered because the Daleks only have one eye. They have this little eye stalk thing that pops out. And apparently the Dalek can see the entire room sitting in the doorway, even when they're like sitting, even though they're sitting like right up against the wall, right up against the doorway. There's no way the Dalek can see them. Somehow he does.
Yep.
So then they decide that they're going to take the encrusted dirt off of Susan's shoes and make mud out of it with the water that the Dalek gave them. And so they're going to stick that onto the eye stalk and then push it onto the
rug.
Onto the cloak, and it powers down, and that kills the Dalek mutation inside.
And so then they put Ian inside the Dalek, and he pretends to be a Dalek. I love that too.
Yeah,
That's
hilarious. They kill that Dalek, and then they take the top off of it, and I really love this scene. It's a really great scene where Ian takes the top off the Dalek, looks inside, and then he looks out really quick, and the Doctor looks inside and looks out really quick, and they say, "Hey, Barbara, Susan, go out in the hallway and see if anyone's coming," and then they take the cloak up and they reach inside and take the cloak out very gingerly and then put it down in the corner. And so you don't know yet that the Daleks actually are a mutation inside of a shell. It's kind of assumed that they're actually some sort of robotic race because you haven't seen any sort of organic part to it. Right. But it's this very small, very well done scene. And then later on, the camera kind of pans over to the cloak and you see it kind of move a little bit. And that's where you get... Yeah. There was a thing in there. There's a little thing controlling that shell. And I just like it's this little character moment where Ian and the Doctor are just trying to keep that from Barbara and Susan so they don't understand. They don't have to see this grotesque mutation.
I think Christopher Eccleston, the Ninth Doctor, does something similar with Rose where he doesn't want her to see the inside in the Dalek episode. But I mean, she does. Yeah. But it's like, there's obviously that element of it is more grotesque than you want to know.
Yeah, it's just like mass of flesh. When you later see what it looks like, not in this episode, but later on in the series, it's just this writhing mass of flesh, basically. So mutated beyond what life should be.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Ian jumps inside the Dalek. There's a very funny scene where he tries to figure out how to talk like a Dalek.
Yeah.
Where he's like, it's kind of weird to hear the voice filter of the Daleks over someone just talking normally.
Yeah.
It sounds so weird. Because you're just used to them, in a very monotone voice and always yelling about stuff.
Yeah. So, but then they escape.
Yep, they escape, go back to the Thalls, and then the
rest of the serial is mostly...
Yeah, and it does kind of hit a dead spot once they get back to the Thalls, other than the scene where they try to convince the Thalls that they have to go to war against the Daleks.
Which is very different. The Doctor's going to convince someone to go to war.
Yeah, no, and...
Obviously it's necessary.
Yeah.
But
the episode then hits a dead spot after, I believe, the Daleks essentially trick and assassinate the leader of the Thalls, and then Ian has to convince the Thalls that they have to fight the Daleks in order to survive, and that the Daleks are essentially evil mutations. And so... And then the episode hits a dead spot where they have to get back into the city that they just escaped from.
And that is 3 whole episodes. This is a 7-part serial.
Yeah.
The last 3 are them getting back into the city. And for me, that's where the serial kind of just got a chore to watch because it's like there's this journey now, but the Daleks aren't a part of it anymore. They're just kind of in the background. And it's like they've switched into a different story where they're just getting through all these weird traps. It's almost like it becomes an Indiana Jones type of thing with the cave they have to go through, and then the lake. And then once they get back into the city for the last half of the last episode, it's great. I love how it ends.
Yeah, no, but it's a massive problem with classic Doctor Who that the serials were so long that sometimes the story, actually most of the time, the story couldn't sustain the entire serial. So you would hit dead spots, and I don't think it would be quite as bad watching it as a weekly show.
Yeah.
Because it's not designed to be watched back to back like how we watch it now. And so I think that's where it gets very excruciating to keep on watching this. But there's that one scene in particular that's just almost ruins this whole serial, that like you can almost not even get past it because it's so long and so boring. Is the cave scene that you were talking about, where Ian, Barbara, and a whole bunch of Thals have split off from the main group that is right now the Doctor's disrupting the city, which that's actually a good scene.
Yeah.
I like where the Doctor basically disables their communications.
But most of the stuff in these 3 episodes is the Doctor's not in it very much. It's mostly Ian and the cave stuff.
Yeah, and so they go into this cave and they find this little passageway. And the worst part is when they have to make this jump across from one section of the cave to another across this chasm.
Oh God!
And they spend I swear to God, 10 minutes
Yeah.
on this one scene. The camera changes angles 3 times. Where it's they have I think 4 people. They have Ian, Barbara, one Thal and then another Thal, and it's Barbara goes across and she has to swing her way across the ledge, and that takes 4 minutes. And then the Thal guy has to do it, and then Ian has to do it, and then the last Thal guy tries to do it and he doesn't quite make it and he falls. It's that spans at least.
That should have been the first thing that happened to create some tension for the others. If Barbara gets across and makes it fine, there's no tension for the rest of the scene.
Yeah, I know. It just keeps on dragging on.
Yeah.
And also, this is part of where the low budget of the show shows through, where there's just one scene in particular that I'll never forget, where Ian, he's clinging to it because the Thal that jumped across and didn't quite make it is hanging onto a rope tied around Ian. And so Ian's hanging on. And onto these you can tell that they're fake, basically styrofoam rocks.
Yeah.
And then he accidentally rips off a chunk of it, and there's this white spot. And it's
I remember that.
And he tries to just kind of play it off that it was just a rock that fell, but
Yeah.
it's oh man, he just ripped a chunk off the set.
I guess that's a good point to talk about. Is that they mess up there and they don't do a reshoot or anything.
Well, because
you
they
see
can't.
that right. It's such a tight production schedule. In this serial, and I didn't see it in anything else we watched. I think they probably got past it once you got to the second Doctor.
Yeah.
But the actors mess up their lines a lot.
Yeah.
And Barbara was Susan. Susan, the granddaughter, is the worst about it. Where she will mess up a line, stop, pause, and restart. And it's she didn't even try to work it into the thing, and they don't stop and reshoot it. They just keep going on, and that's so different from our idea of how you shoot TV today, where it's very professional, or even 5 years after this would have been done.
Yeah, but it's it would have cost way too much money and taken way too much time to try to reshoot all those shots. So it is very strange seeing actors flub lines in the finished product, and it doesn't only happen once. It happens in a lot in quite a few serials. It's not just in the Daleks; it's in a lot of the first Doctor's run. And they do get past it basically by the end of the first Doctor's run and into the second Doctor. That basically doesn't happen anymore. Because I think by then Doctor Who had more of a reputation as being a very well-written show, and so it was getting more money and more time.
But William Hartnell, though, to his credit, you were talking to me about this the other day.
Yeah.
He works that into the character when he messes up a line, and it's actually almost become a character.
Yeah, it's essentially a character trait of the first Doctor, where sometimes he does it intentionally, sometimes it's an accident. But since he's this old man, it kind of makes sense that he kind of rambles sometimes and stops himself in the middle of a sentence, and he does work flubbing lines almost into a character trait, which is very, very creative, I think.
I was always asking myself, did he do that on purpose, or was that a mess up? Or so we'll see. But, no, we won't see.
Yeah, no, you.
I don't know what I just said.
You'll never find out what William Hartnell was doing and why he was doing it.
I'm going to keep that in because that was kind of a funny mess up that we had to kind of show the mess up in the show.
Way to retcon that. Very well
See?
done. Very
Doctor Who of us.
Yeah, very Whovian. But anyway,
right, let's finish this serial.
So then, what happens after? So they get through the cave.
Eventually they get into the city.
Yeah, but before that, the Doctor and Susan get captured again.
Yeah.
So it's the second time they've been captured by the Daleks in this episode. And At this point, the Daleks have figured out, because they've given some of the anti-radiation drugs to some of the Daleks, and all the Daleks who got it are dying. So the Daleks figure out that after all this time, they have mutated even further to the point that they need radiation to live. And this just immediately gets dropped after this. Like, I don't think it's even ever addressed in the next Dalek episode that they need radiation to live. But at this point in time, apparently they do. So then they decide what they're going to do is set off another neutrino bomb so that the radiation doesn't all just dissipate, so that they can still survive. And this is where you see this is the first time for the Doctor when he finds out what they're doing, and he's basically chained up to this wall, and he finds out that what they're planning to do is set off this neutrino bomb. This is the first time I believe the Doctor ever shows this massive respect for life, where he's just railing against them, like, you cannot do this, you cannot kill all these people. And before that, the Doctor's been this very angry, grumpy old man who'll do something like, spill the fluid link so that they have to go into the city to get what he wants. And now you can see how much the Doctor really cares about life. And that's like where the Doctor becomes the Doctor for me. Really, is in that scene when he's chained up against the walls, and he understands then the Daleks are evil, and that's when the Doctor is the Doctor to me.
Yeah, it's a good scene.
It's a really good scene.
But they stopped them from setting off the neutrino bomb. And what happened to the Daleks? Are they?
The Daleks are this begins the long-standing tradition that at the end of basically every single Dalek serial, the Daleks, all of them die.
Yep.
All of them die. Next one, they all come back somehow. Because at the end of the episode, the Ian and the Thals rush in, have a massive battle with the Daleks. Actually, and here's a point to bring up. The effect of the Daleks shooting people is so hilarious.
I know.
Because it's basically the camera will zoom in on the little gun sticking out of the Dalek, and like a little thing will pop out, and there will be a shooting sound, and then the camera will like switch over to looking at the person getting shot, and then all of a sudden the screen will just turn negative, and the guy will, and every single person that gets shot by the Dalek has the exact same reaction where he goes, "Bah!" and he flies over backwards. All of them do the exact same thing. And so, like, basically, the effect of getting shot is you go, "Blah!" Screen goes negative, and you fly over backwards.
I just love that the entire screen goes negative.
Yeah.
It's like somehow that hurts the surroundings, too.
Yeah. But then eventually it got refined down to, believe in the 80s was finally the point where the negative zone was only around the person being shot.
Right.
And then now, in the Revive series, they have something similar. Well, now you can actually see the laser. It's not just like you see a little, like, gun thing popping out. But you actually see the laser, and now instead of it being negative, it has a sort of blue electric kind of effect.
You see their bones, see their
skeletons and stuff. Yeah.
So the Daleks are all exterminated.
Yeah.
The Thals get to live in peace.
There's also this great scene where the sort of the leader of the Daleks, where I think how they kill the Daleks is basically how they killed the one at the beginning, where they shut down the system by which they can bring electricity up from the floor through static electricity. That's how static electricity works. Keep in mind. They shut that down. I don't know how you shut down static electricity, but that's what they do. All the Daleks die, and the last Dalek rolls over to the Doctor and says, You have to turn it on. This will be the end of the Daleks. And the Doctor says, even if I wanted to, I don't know how. So basically the Doctor decides he's not going to save the Daleks, which is kind of something that goes away where the Doctor doesn't kill all the Daleks, and then comes back in the Revive series where he has a sort of character arc where at the beginning he's very grumpy, becomes more compassionate, then gets grumpy again.
Yeah.
So the Doctor says, I'm not going to save you, and then the Dalek goes, "Rah!" and dies.
Yeah.
And so all the Daleks are dead, and then they come back next season.
That's great.
I don't even remember how they explain it.
Well, that's the thing. That is one trait or tradition they probably did not need to bring back in the classic series, is kill all the Daleks, then revive them. They've done that every single appearance of the Daleks in the Revive series, except in Series 5. And I love this. They left a window open where there are Daleks out there, and they can use them. I'm like, finally, thank God.
Yeah, where they don't have to.
The tradition.
Yeah, they don't have to come up with why the Daleks are back and like the Pandorica opens. It's like, there are Daleks. Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
You didn't kill all the Daleks again.
Yeah.
This is like that does become kind of an annoying sticking point of the Daleks.
Although it is funny to hear, I think it's especially the funniest one is probably in the season 3 appearance of the Daleks in the Revived series. The explanations for how they come back. They get
Which
very
one
funny.
is that?
That's the one where they're in New York.
Yeah,
and I don't even remember, but it's hilarious, like how they survived. Like we had a transporter beam or something.
Yeah, it was like emergency temporal shift.
Yeah,
because there's like the cult of Skaro. And then before that, there was like they found a Time Lord prison.
Yeah, that one made sense.
Yeah, that one wasn't quite as bad. I thought it was a little weird.
The one at the end of Series 1 is also a stretch, but they've been building up to it, so it works, more or less. But, yeah. So anyway, that's the Daleks. Now that we've kind of recapped the whole serial, let's talk about it as a whole. What's your main thing you love about this one? Why did you pick it as the best one?
I think, for me, it is when the Doctor, like I said, becomes the Doctor, where I think William Hartnell in the writing really finds the heart of the character. Because as I said in the very first episode, An Unearthly Child, you don't really get a feel for the Doctor because he's constantly in danger. He's always in danger. He's always on the run, or he's captured. That happens twice, also in the very first serial, where he gets captured.
That was only like 4 episodes. How did that work? Okay.
Well, it gets captured at the end of the second one. Gets captured at the beginning of the fourth one. So it just happens a lot for him. So the Doctor becomes the Doctor in this episode. I think also, I really love William Russell as Ian Chesterton.
He's good in this one.
He's so good. He's one of my favorite companions. Or Ian and Barbara, the pair.
He's a bit too antagonistic to the Doctor towards my taste at the beginning.
But you also didn't get the context from the beginning of the episode. The Doctor basically kidnapped them because they're concerned for Susan. They think that the Doctor's doing something weird with this police box, and so they rush into the police box, and that's when, it's bigger on the inside and all that stuff. And then the Doctor basically closes the door, doesn't let them leave, and takes off.
Okay, I get that now, yeah.
So it's like, with the context, Chesterton's behavior is a lot more
believable.
Yeah, believable. And because for those early episodes, Ian is basically the main character.
Right, the Doctor
he does the most action in it because, William Hartnell's too old to be running
the Doctor,
around.
This is something I noticed, and this is maybe apart from the stuff with the cave and all that, we've accepted that that's just a bad thing about it. But my biggest complaint watching this is that I really, really liked William Hartnell's characterization of the Doctor. I think it was fascinating to watch him do this, and I think he's a great actor doing really great work. And I was disappointed, and now that you explain it, I understand that he was too old to keep up with his work schedule. But I really wanted to see him in it more, and he's not in it that much, and that disappointed me. So there
aren't a lot of First Doctor episodes where the First Doctor plays a big part, where he's the main part. In a lot of them, he's not even in whole episodes because William Hartnell just physically as an actor couldn't do it anymore. He was getting so old. Actually, kind of weird is in season 3 he is more, but season 3 is mostly junked by the BBC. So
that sucks.
Yeah, I know. But his version of the Doctor does work better in the background, I think.
Right, and
he's
I
not
think that's
upfront
true.
Action. He's the one coming up with the ideas. He's the one figuring out how static electricity somehow works, how static electricity doesn't work.
That's why I think of all of them, even though there are Doctors who make really big jumps away from maybe the last incarnation, he probably is the most different of all of them.
Yeah.
Because of that. But I still think when you watch William Hartnell, there is so much of the Doctor in there that to this day, we can say maybe the current Dr. Matt Smith, his probably biggest influence is Patrick Troughton. There's still some William Hartnell in there because there was William Hartnell and Patrick Troughton.
Yeah, no.
There was William Hartnell and John Pertwee and everyone else because he originated the character, and I do like watching him. And I was a little disappointed to see that he wasn't in it that much, but that's okay. It's not a complaint so much as a thing to notice. And he does get a scene at the end, his sort of speech before he leaves the Thals, and his speech about their civilization stuff is really great. That's a good scene.
Yeah, where he tells them that he never gives advice, never. But one thing, always search for truth.
Yeah.
That's one of the things where the best part about the writing was some of the First Doctor's speeches that he got were really good. There's another good one at the end of the Dalek invasion of Earth that's when Susan is left behind on Earth because the Doctor understands that he can't keep on taking Susan with him on all these really dangerous travels, and that she needs to settle down on Earth, and she finds this man that she loves, and he says, "Goodbye, but one day I will return. And until then, go forward in all your beliefs and prove to me correct in mine." And I think it's just
That's a great line.
Yeah, there's a lot of just really great speeches that the First Doctor does get, and that William Hartnell hits them all out of the park every single time he gives one.
Yeah. I mean, when he'll flub the lines every once in a while, but watching the serial, I could tell when he was called upon to really act, he did it. And that sets a precedent, obviously, because he set the bar pretty high for everyone else. And they would continually set the bar higher and higher. So that's pretty cool. I guess the last thing I want to ask about the First Doctor is, what the fuck happened to Susan?
Well, do you mean like what happened after Susan gets left behind?
Yeah. Do we ever in the classic series hear from her again?
Well, okay, she comes back once, and actually Carol Ann Ford, the actress who plays her, comes back in The Five Doctors, but that's a crossover story. Okay. So that doesn't really count. And I think there is a book that was written in the new Eighth Doctor adventure line where he meets Susan. I haven't read any of the books really. Yeah. But I think it does come back in expanded universe stuff, but it's never really directly addressed.
There are definitely overtones in the revived series that she's dead.
Doctor, I think probably eventually, because she's a Time Lord, gets pulled into the Time War somehow.
And I mean, the Doctor does. He's asked by Rose and then Martha and a few of his other companions, do you have kids or anything? And he says, I was a father once, that's over now. Or, did you have family? And he said, they're all gone. And so, I mean, it's kind of like they don't mention her by name, but they're kind of like, 40 years later saying, yeah, she's dead. And I feel like it's really weird to think about that watching. I kept watching it, I'm thinking, we don't know how she died, but it must have been a sticky end. And that's sad because she's really cute.
And then one of the things that's interesting with Susan as a character is that, well, one, a lot of people don't even really, a lot of new Whovians don't understand that the Doctor has a granddaughter and that she was actually a character at the very beginning of the show. And then another thing is a lot of people don't like Susan because and it's not as pronounced in this one, but in a lot of the serials, she's sort of called upon to be the one that, overreacts to everything, and she's runs around and she screams a lot, and she can get on your nerves a lot. But one of the things that it kind of almost get retconned by is that later on, because at this early on in the show, you know that they're aliens, but you don't know anything about Time Lords. You don't know anything about Gallifrey. You don't know anything about that. Right. There's actually some weird stuff where the Time Lords have two hearts, but in a few episodes of the First Doctor's run, they check his heart, and he only has one heart. Oh. Because they don't know about because they haven't come up with the two hearts thing yet. And it's really weird watching that because they always play with the whole two hearts thing. Yeah. But Susan is actually 16 years old, even just literally 16 years old, not relative human biology. Right. As a time lady, I guess 16 years old. Right. So that's why it makes sense to me. She's always screaming as sort of being retconned later by the series that you understand the Time Lords are incredibly long-lived. Right.
Race. I mean, she's like a baby for their race, I would assume.
Yeah,
she's 16.
Effectively. Yeah. And in my mind, how Susan goes off with the Doctor is that I think she probably stowed away on the TARDIS with him. I don't think...
Yeah, that's
in my mind, I don't think the Doctor really wanted to take her with him.
No.
And that's one of the reasons why he leaves her with Earth, with this man that she meets that she loves on Earth, to help rebuild the Earth after the Dalek invasion, because he can't keep taking her with him on all these dangerous travels.
Right, I mean, he's a compassionate man, always. And then, if she stowed away, he would obviously protect her and take her along, but there would be a point where he couldn't.
Yeah, and he couldn't take her back because he was on the run effectively from the Time Lords, because he's a criminal.
Okay. So let's move on to the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton.
And it's something to note here is that Patrick Troughton is my favorite Doctor. Like I said, he's the first Doctor that I ever saw. And then going back and watching his stuff is that a lot of the traits that Patrick Troughton exhibits as a Doctor are a lot of the traits that most of the other Doctors hit on a lot too and take from him. Yeah. Is that outwardly he's very compassionate, very goofy, very funny, but you can always get this sense, and sometimes it comes through, of this very intelligent, very serious, almost dark man behind that. And you see that a lot, particularly with the Fourth Doctor, with the Seventh Doctor, and Matt Smith, now with the 11th Doctor.
But I think in every Doctor I've seen, except obviously William Hartnell, there is some amount of Patrick Troughton in there. Yeah. He is so phenomenal in the role. But yeah, you can see the influence he's had on the show. And I mean, he is, I think, the first. I mean, yeah, the Doctor becomes the Doctor in the Daleks, as we were talking with William Hartnell. But I feel like Patrick Troughton is the first Doctor as we know the Doctor.
Yeah, he sort of, because that's when he's no longer so grumpy, so adverse to the people traveling with him, where he really embraces all of his companions and loves them a lot. Yeah. And he has such a joy for going around and finding all the stuff always. Yep. He has just such a joy about him at being able to discover what he discovers and see what he gets to see. And that's why I love Patrick Troughton so much as the Doctor. He's so good at having this very childlike innocence and curiosity to him. But when the shit hits the fan, he knows what to do. Yeah. He can take care of business.
He takes care of business in big ways. But he can flip that switch off and on. But we'll talk about that later on when we talk about the serial. But we both love Patrick Troughton. Most Who fans love Patrick Troughton. There's one entity that hates Patrick Troughton. Do you want to tell me who they are?
The fucking BBC.
Fuck you, BBC.
Fuck those guys. Because, like we were talking about, that some of the episodes get junked, and that at the time they didn't realize that later on this would get re-released on this magical thing called home video, and that people could watch the episodes again. Right. They thought, well, we've got all this tape just stored away, running out of space. Fuck it. Burn it. Yeah, that's what they said.
Well, it wasn't burn it. What they had, let me explain the history here, is they had all the videos of the episodes stored on analog tape, and kind of similar to VHS, but more high quality because they were using this for broadcasting. And to save money, and what you should understand if you're an American listening to this and you don't really get the BBC, it's a government organization. Yeah. And it is not run like this so much anymore, to an extent, but back then it was run like a government bureaucracy. Yeah. In that cutting costs and efficiency and all those things were its number one goal. And so in the 70s, which would have been more or less after Patrick Troughton's time.
Yeah, that was Patrick Troughton's last season was in 69.
But when they were filming new stuff for the third and fourth Doctor, but also other shows on the BBC, they decided to cut costs. They would use those old analog tapes that had Doctor Who stored on them, and they would erase them and tape over them with the new shows. So those analog tapes that used to have Patrick Troughton serials exist, but they've got something else on them.
Yeah.
And so that's how they cut costs. It happened to a lot of famous shows at the time. Doctor Who took a lot of hits from this, but there were actually other shows that were decimated far further. There are shows that don't even exist anymore because of this.
Yeah, there's one of the precursors to Doctor Who, the Quatermass Experiment, which was like a single serial of science fiction that was established sort of a lot of like what British sci-fi does. That show's completely junked.
Yeah. Monty Python, obviously one of the most iconic BBC shows, was almost junked, and people were panicking about that, and the Pythons themselves did not have the money to buy the tapes back, but someone else did and bought the rights to the tapes and then sold them to the Pythons. So the Pythons themselves, I think, hold the rights to the show because of that instance. But, I mean, can you imagine where comedy would be if Monty Python didn't exist because of junking?
Yeah, no,
that would be like the Beatles' music not existing for reference.
Yeah.
You know, but Patrick Troughton did, William Hartnell's serials, there was a lot that was hit from that, but Patrick Troughton was definitely hit the hardest.
For William Hartnell, there's one, The Crusade, the Marco Polo that's completely gone from season 1. There's some of the last episode from season 1 is gone. There's a few from season 2, but a lot of season 3 for William Hartnell got hit really hard. There's a lot of completely missing stories or partially missing stories. And then for whatever reason with Patrick Troughton, they just went ballistic and went all over the place. Just like season 1 from Patrick Troughton, almost all completely gone.
Yeah, like his first serial, you can't watch it.
Yeah, it's like luckily there exist fan reconstructions, and I've watched a lot of them that use still photographs from the set. And what people would do back in the day, since they couldn't home record, is that for video they would home record it auditorily. Yeah. Where they would using basically cassettes, and so they would record that way. So the audio for all of them exists in full.
So that's how we know now the stories of these is that the audio still exists, so you can do the reconstructions.
Yeah,
and that's how you'll find like the Wikipedia summaries. They're summarizing what you hear on the audio tracks.
Yeah, and there were a lot of the reconstructions are very well done. And if you're a big Doctor Who fan, I recommend going out and trying to find as many of them as you can. In particular, from as I said with Marco Polo from the first Doctor season, I found a reconstruction the other day and watched through it, and that's a really, really good one that I recommend if you can find the reconstruction online. It's very well done. It's a very, very good serial.
And, sometimes they would wipe parts of serials, but not the other episodes.
Yeah.
And there is a box set out there. I saw this at Barnes & Noble the other day. This is really interesting. Of all the individual episodes from the Lost episodes, you can buy as like a 4-disc set. And that would be really weird to watch just randomly.
Yeah, it's like I could not do that. Where you just I think there's like The Wheel in Space, one of the Second Doctor's episodes or from serials. I didn't realize it was junked and it was on Netflix Instant Streaming, and there were only 2 episodes, and it was like the first and third episode from the serial. Like I can't handle that.
Right.
I can't watch that.
Yeah.
It's so hard.
It's out there, and a lot of that is just for historical reference because Doctor Who is obviously very influential.
Yeah.
So they have a lot of that. But the serial that Sean has picked for this one was also hit very hard by, well, not as hard as some, but it was hit by junking, and that's why we can segue into that discussion.
Okay, so something else to note here is that since Patrick Chapman is my favorite Doctor, and The Invasion is my favorite serial from the Second Doctor, The Invasion is effectively my favorite serial from the show. But I actually kind of have a hard time saying that it is the best serial from the Second Doctor's run, because there are some problems with it, but it so caters to what I like that I love the serial so much. But probably the actual technically best would be Tomb of the Cybermen. But I freaking love The Invasion, so we're talking about The Invasion.
This is The Invasion by Derek Sherwin.
Yes, and based on a story from Kit Pedler.
I was going to write that on this outline, and I was like, I don't know if we need it. I can't believe you know the name of the guy who did the story.
Of course, it's my favorite Doctor Who serial. Of course I remember the name of the guy who wrote it, or came up with the original story.
I understand you remember, like, the writer, but, like, story by Kit Pedler?
Dude, it's 8 episodes long. I saw that 8 times. Of course I remember it. But so, anyways, we were talking about with the junking. This got hit by the first and 4th episodes were completely junked. None of it exists other than some still photographs and audio recordings.
Yeah, and this should show you that they kind of junked at random. Like, they just took random things off the shelf.
Yeah, they're just like missing parts of some serials, and they'll just have like standalone episodes in place and stuff like that. But what happened was, and I don't remember the name of the animation company that did this, but one company, when they were making the DVD release for The Invasion, they hired these guys to animate to the audio recordings of the first and 4th episodes. And
in black and white, so it looks like the visuals of the show.
And in my opinion, it is insanely well done, and it actually kind of looks better than what was actually shot, because they were able to do more with the animation than actually being able to film it because of the tight production schedule.
Yeah.
Where you were actually, they did a few little things where it's not entirely faithful, because they did some stuff with the camera work that you wouldn't actually have been able to do with Doctor Who at the time, but it makes it look cool.
And if you watch All in Order, it's not jarring to jump to the animation.
Yeah, and when I go back and think about The Invasion, like when I put The Invasion on this list, I had forgotten that the 2 of the episodes were animated, because it fits in so well. The animation is done so faithfully to the show with the coloring, and Patrick Troughton and Jamie and Zoe, they all look like so themselves. Much like the actors that played them.
The only thing I noticed is that Patrick Troughton doesn't look quite as old, but the animation isn't all that.
Yeah, he didn't have all the wrinkles that Patrick. Even though Patrick Troughton, I believe he was in his 40s, or actually maybe in his late 30s when he was playing the Second Doctor. He looks way older than that, doesn't he?
I thought he must have been in his 50s.
No, even pictures I've seen of him when he was younger, he has those the deep set wrinkles around his mouth that just make him look really old and really wise. And that's one of the things about with the Doctor, that at this point the Doctor's probably about 300 years old.
Yeah.
And that's actually kind of believable with Patrick Troughton. Just he looks so wizened in his face. When he just has such a great face for the Doctor.
So, yeah, the animation does look good. It reminded me, when I first saw it, a little bit of Yellow Submarine.
Yeah, it is in a similar style.
Right, it's in a simplistic style like that, where I feel like you could do a lot of it in a short period of time.
Yeah.
Because it's minimalist, but it's in a good way. So, yeah, it was good to see.
But unfortunately, doing animation like that isn't particularly cost-effective. You're not going to get a huge return from people buying a DVD of The Invasion that came out in 1969 as a Doctor Who serial. That's not a huge market. So
I bet we would probably see another one of these one day, because I know there are other Troughton stories that have 1 or 2 episodes missing.
Yeah.
But
as long as you don't have to do like a whole 2-hour serial.
Yeah.
There's still a chance that they might do some more of this. But right now,
And
as far as I'm aware, there's no more plans.
And I wouldn't be surprised because like computers have gotten so advanced, and what fans have done.
Yeah, like some fans have tried to tackle doing this, and there's a few fans projects that are actively doing it. As far as I'm aware, there's none that have completed any.
Right, but I'm just saying, like 10 years down the road, we will probably have seen at least one completed fan project like this, because 10 years ago now we couldn't have imagined that even this would happen, but it did. So it's
and a vast majority of the reconstructions aren't like official BBC reconstructions. Almost all of them are fan ones. There are a few select ones that are actual BBC sponsored reproductions that actually have some of the actors coming back narrating the parts that you can't tell just from the audio recordings.
All right, so let's go over what the invasion's about briefly.
Okay, so the invasion is effectively about the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe. Jamie and Zoe are his two companions, Jamie being a Scottish Highlander from the previously mentioned The Highlanders episode. Jamie is really, really awesome.
And
I love Jamie.
He's the second Doctor's companion for almost his entire run, right?
Because The Highlanders is the second Doctor's second episode, and Jamie's with him all throughout the rest of his 3 seasons. And then Zoe comes in the previous season on the Wheel in Space, and she's from humanity's future, and she's basically a mathematical genius. And they come in this episode in particular a lot that I like about the second Doctor that kind of annoys me about the Revive series is that in this, the Doctor doesn't know everything, and he's not all powerful that he sometimes seems to be in the Revive show. Particularly with near the end with David Tennant, is that they made the Doctor so smart where he could figure everything out and always take care of it that it got a little annoying. And in this, the Doctor very much needs Jamie and Zoe to help him. Like, Zoe solves some of the problems herself through her mathematical skills. Jamie solves some of the problems himself because he spent his life before he met the Doctor basically as a guerrilla fighter against the British in the Highlands. And so the Jamie knows a lot of how to handle stuff, and so does Zoe. And the Doctor relies on them to help him solve problems. That I really love that you got a lot with the second Doctor, that he used his companions.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so the invasion is about they land on Earth in a cow field, and that the TARDIS is malfunctioning, and they need to get a lab.
Really, the TARDIS is malfunctioning?
Yeah, what? No, that only happens every single serial. But so the Doctor needs to get a particular circuit in the TARDIS repaired, so he takes it out, and in this timeline. From a previous episode, he had a friend. I don't quite remember the friend's name, but he's a professor. It's a professor that he had worked with in a previous episode.
Professor Watkins.
Professor Watkins.
I have it on.
Well, no, I know Professor Watkins is the one that he actually gets. What the one he wants to get is from a previous serial. Okay. The actor wasn't available, so they replace him with Professor Watkins. And how they did that is they go to the guy who they want to find. They go to his house. And find Professor Watkins' niece there, and apparently Professor Watkins, conveniently enough, is now living in the old professor's house, and they can use his lab. So it's
That's
because
awesome.
I was probably a very hasty rewrite because they couldn't get the actor. But anyways, I kind of skimmed over one of the things that I really love is that the setup to this episode where they hitchhike with this truck driver, and this truck driver is saying he's working for this corporation, and the Doctor asks, what corporation? And he laughs and he says, there's only one corporation. And that's where it sets up this sort of very, I believe the episode's supposed to be set, about mid-70s, which kind of gets messed up later on, where there's a lot of chronological stuff that gets messed up during the third Doctor's run with this. But it's kind of set in the near future from this episode, from this timeline's perspective of Earth, and that basically there's this one corporation, Electric Cybernetics, that has taken over basically all the corporations in Britain, and it has a sort of almost 1984 sort of oppressive totalitarian feel.
And no one even questions that it's... Right.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing, is when you see that truck driver, he's not questioning that there's another... He's just like, it's the corporation.
Yeah, it's the corporation.
So people just have accepted that.
Yeah, and then eventually, after the Doctor, Jamie, and Zoe get out and they go over to Professor Watkins' house, that truck driver gets pulled over by these officers that are actually working for the corporation, and they kill him. Yeah. Because he's trying to get across an area that he's not supposed to be able to cross. So it sets up the tone of this episode, and I really... love dystopian fiction. That's one of my favorite genres, with 1984 being one of my favorite books. So that's one of the reasons why This episode caters to me is that I love that very oppressive, totalitarian atmosphere that the Doctor has to sort of fight against.
You know, I love that kind of stuff too, but I had not thought when I was watching this, and I can't believe I didn't get it in 8 episodes, that for the time when this aired, they were setting it in the future.
It's like the very near future.
Right, but I was watching, I'm like, oh, this is in the past, it's in black and white. I guess I wasn't thinking, like, historically.
Yeah, no, it kind of messes with your head. And as I said, all that basically, there's, like, a lot of controversy with Whovians about, like, where a lot of the unit stories, because we'll get into unit in a little bit.
We'll get into unit.
Where these stories fit in with the chronology, because it's so confusing with once the third Doctor comes in, which is set in contemporary times, which is set in the future from when the second Doctor was working with unit, and so that's all confusing, and there's a lot of obsessive fans trying to figure out how the chronology works. I'm going to help you out. It doesn't work, guys. Just don't
I have
worry about
actually a forward explanation that I think is the best one ever offered. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey.
Yeah. Although another thing, because I've been going a lot on some like Doctor Who forums and message boards and stuff. Some of you guys use that timey wimey a little bit too much. It's getting a little ridiculous.
Okay. I'm just saying. I think it's great that Stephen Moffat introduced that, and I think it's just a message to the fans. Don't take it too seriously. Now, don't. But then people, you're right.
But now people are taking timey wimey seriously,
right?
Which is like just to stop arguing about, because every time someone brings up time travel now, every single time there's one guy that says timey-wimey. It's like, we can't talk about time travel anymore, because if you just say timey-wimey, we can't say anything anymore.
Right.
So be careful with timey-wimey.
I don't think it's a catch-all thing, but, you know.
But in stuff like this, where there's obvious, just like they didn't realize, there's like there was no plan in place, just timey-wimey fits there. It's like some of the stuff, just ignore it. But so anyways, with the invasion, you have the corporation, and then you meet
the best villain.
One of my favorite villains in anything ever. I love this guy, Tobias Vaughn, who is running the corporation. He is so awesome. He is like the quintessential like B-movie human villain that's like not an alien. He's the human. Yep. And then he also has, and a lot of these Doctor Who characters that are like the side characters that are so great, they come in pairs. And you'll see this when we talk about this later. But this one is Tobias Vaughn and his security guard, Packer.
And the way he says the word Packer...
It's like, Packer! Yeah. It's like,
I even when he's called, like, Packer. That little thing he does, it's like... you know what I wrote down when I was taking notes on him? Because I have many notes on Tobias Vaughn, because I kept having to talk about him. But basically, it's just that he's so calmly sinister and utterly in control all the time.
Except for in the brief, like there's like 2 or 3 spots where he just snaps, and you're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
He's like, this guy means business.
Like, I think the defining scene for Tobias Vaughn, the one I wrote down, is where he's goading Watkins the scientist into shooting him.
Oh yeah.
Shoot me, Watkins. But we find out that bullets don't actually hurt him, and that's...
Because he has a cybernetic body.
Right. But he's so calm and collected and sure of himself. And that's what makes him scary.
He gets shot 3 times in the chest and he just laughs.
Yeah.
And it's so great.
So, Sean, you will get this. People who go to Golden High School will get this. So if you're a Golden High School student, you'll get this. He seems to me like the villainous male version of Miss Fabrizio.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And he's like, there's just like, with Tobias Vaughn, he's basically the reason why this is my favorite serial of all time, because I love like really great villains, and by the end of the serial you kind of understand he's a lot more complex of a villain than you originally led to believe, and you get like you understand who he is. You get, even though he doesn't have a whole lot of screen time, by the end of the serial you understand who Tobias Vaughn is and why Tobias Vaughn does what he does.
Right. And I love in the last episode or 2, do you mind if we spoiled mildly? Because we didn't.
We'll have to glance over more of the, because this is 8 episodes long, and there's a lot more happening here than the
basically, in the end, and I will get into what his plan is, but it's sort of an enemy become friend thing.
Yeah.
At the end, and not really the Doctor's friend, but he and the Doctor do team up, and that's my favorite part, seeing Patrick Troughton and Tobias Vaughn working together.
And they have like the emotion gun that they're shooting. Yeah. Okay, and so
the emotion gun, we'll get to that. Yeah, that's great.
But so the Doctor then he finds out that Professor Watkins is working for the company, and he goes to meet them. And there's this trait about the second Doctor, and that is lost by the Doctors, and I kind of miss, is that this is when computers were new. So you have to keep that in mind. So he meets, when he goes into the corporation, he meets in the lobby, there's this computer. And it's like, for the time, this would have been like, holy crazy, oh my god, there's a computer in a lobby. And it's basically what you have to do, like when you call somewhere and there's just like a robot answering machine. That's basically what this was, only it was sitting in the lobby.
And it's huge.
Yeah, and it's like huge, and it's like got reel-to-reel tape on it and stuff like that. And just the doctor just gets so angry. He just gets furious at this one machine because he just keeps on yelling at it. It's like, this stupid machine. And I really miss that the doctor now, because computers are so common, it's like he kind of has to. I miss the character trait where the doctor he hated, like, it also happens in a lot of other Second Doctor stories. He just hates computers. Like, he hates all these, like, stupid computers that just don't understand requests, because he understands what makes humanity tick. He, like, understands the psychology behind people so well. He cannot stand freaking computers.
I know, and I've had to kind of like think this in my brain. The Doctor in the Revive series knows computers. Like, he's the best computer person.
Particularly with David Tennant. There's a lot of scenes where David Tennant just like knows computers so well, and it bugs me because I'm a Patrick Troughton fan.
What I was going to say is, I'm going to just assume that between the 8th and 9th Doctors, in that long period where we didn't see the Doctor, he was spending hundreds of years investigating computers and learned a lot. And
he was going to university learning computer science just to get over his anger at
my
computers.
favorite one, because I just watched this episode again, is in Matt Smith's first episode. He's defeating the bad guys in that. I won't go into the whole story, but he writes a computer virus that will set every clock back to 0 using a cell phone.
Yeah.
That is a big jump from, I hate computers.
You stupid machine!
Yeah.
But so, anyways, then that's when Tobias Vaughn sees the Doctor in the lobby railing against his machine, and he brings him and Jamie up and then you get the scene where the Doctor meets Tobias Vaughn, and that's when you realize that there's something weird about Tobias Vaughn. It's like, and the Doctor realizes that he doesn't blink, and it's really great with Tobias Vaughn is that the actor himself, he really doesn't blink ever, and he has these really.
He has a lazy eye.
Yeah, he has like a lazy eye, and it's like he almost has a sort of like Bond villain look to him, and there's just something slightly off. Like, there's something slightly not human about Tobias Vaughn.
Yeah. I mean, that's just... And back, in these early days of Doctor Who, that's pure performance.
Yeah.
You can't digitize that. That's just him being a good actor, and I love that.
Well, a good, way over the top, but totally awesome performance. Like, and and it's like, when you're doing Doctor Who, a lot of people try to take Doctor Who too seriously, especially old Doctor Who. It's basically like a science fiction B-movie as a TV show, and if you watch it like that and appreciate it for that, and you get yourself into the universe like that, a performance like Tobias Vaughn anywhere else would be too over the top. Here, it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect.
It's even kind of subtle.
Yeah, it really... I mean, when you compare him to, like, Davros, totally subtle. Totally subtle.
And I mean, I'm betting some of the people listening to this podcast are probably fans of the Revived series. That definitely works on modern-day conventions for how you tell a story, and it does that phenomenally well. But, if you go back to the series history, like this stuff, you do have to think of it like Sean just said. It's those kind of conventions as a sci-fi B-movie, as a TV show, and that's how you're going to enjoy it. And you do, see it make that transition into more, with the Revive series, it is more modern. It's actually very cinematic. It's like it
is like a movie and a TV show, which is what I love about the Revive series. But back in the old day, you couldn't get much better than for a sci-fi B movie. There was nothing better than the invading the Earth subgenre in that, and the invasion.
So who's invading, Sean?
The Cybermen, which is. I really love the old Cybermen, and I have a huge chip on my shoulder about the revived Cybermen. Can we
do that in part 3 of this podcast?
We'll do that in part 3, but right now we'll just talk a little bit about the old Cybermen. That this is one of their earlier appearances. Basically, the Cybermen came up a lot in the second Doctor's run. They were the last villain that the first Doctor ever fought. And so, basically, back in the day, the Cybermen were... Actually, their costumes were not cyber at all. They were cloth.
Yeah.
But I kind of like it like that. And so, basically, the Cybermen, it's kind of weird that the Cybermen, they have no emotions at all.
Yeah.
And yet, sometimes they seem really, really arrogant to me. which is like, it's very contradictory with how the Cybermen are portrayed. But I really love it, and that the Cybermen, for whatever reason, they always come up with these very subtle plans of trying to take over stuff, where they never seem to have a big enough force to just outright attack like the Daleks always do. The Cybermen always have to rely on subterfuge. And so that's why they're working with Tobias Vaughn. And Tobias Vaughn's plan basically is to, since he's running this corporation that puts electronics into everything basically in the entire world, he's putting in chips into everything that will allow the Cybermen to hypnotize and cyber control and make docile all the humans on Earth. And so Tobias Vaughn is working with the Cybermen, you think just purely working with them at first, and that they're going to basically take over the world together. Later on, you find out Tobias Vaughn has slightly other plans, and that he's trying to use the Cybermen to his own means.
We probably won't go into much of that, though.
Yeah. So basically, there you go. There's the Cybermen, and then now let's talk a bit about the other side, the side fighting against the Cybermen, Unit, that the Doctor then teams up with. And
is this Unit's first appearance?
It's Unit itself first appearance,
but the Brigadier had been on.
But
before,
the Brigadier,
right?
Who had been, I believe he was, I forget. I think he was only a lieutenant the first time the Doctor met him. But now it's Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart.
I think on this serial he's only called the Brigadier, though, right? Or Brigadier Stewart.
Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart. But yeah,
they don't go to his whole name.
But the Brigadier is probably, aside from the Doctor, the longest standing character in Doctor Who history. And sadly, Nicholas Courtney, the man who played the Brigadier, passed away, I believe, 3 months ago.
Really?
Yeah, no.
Oh, that's sad.
And he never got to appear in the Revive series proper, but he did appear in an episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures in one of the spin-off shows.
I'll just say, like, Sean, you're going to tell us all about the Brigadier in a second, but so this was the first episode where I'd seen the Brigadier, and I just loved the hell out of this character. This is something that often pisses me off about the Revive series, is that nobody fucking trusts the Doctor.
Yeah.
The Brigadier trusts him, and I love that relationship. That not only does the Brigadier trust him, but the Doctor trusts the Brigadier.
Yeah.
And the relationship they have is really cool. He's just an all-around great character, and it's just, he's like the kind of character I wish he had someone like that in the Revived series who was waiting for him on Earth to help him. And so I was like, this Brigadier is cool. I looked him up on Wikipedia. I had no idea how big a character he was on this show. And I'm excited to watch some of the other stuff with him in it. And
they only mention him offhand a few times in the Revive series because they just couldn't get Nicholas Courtney to appear. They tried to get him appear at least once during the Sontaran episodes in the Revive series.
Which has Unit.
Yeah, and they mention him offhand. But the Brigadier basically, what Unit is it stands for United Nations Intelligence Task Force. And then in the Revive series, they couldn't use United Nations anymore, so they changed it to Unified.
Why not
I always call
Nations?
it United Nations.
Oh.
It's the United Nations Intelligence Task Force. And basically, they're kind of like a government military organization version of the X-Files, where they investigate all the sort of unexplainable alien phenomena that happens. And it's run by Brigadier Alistair Gordon Lethbridge Stewart, who, as I said, is one of the longest-standing characters in Doctor Who history, and that he has appeared with all of the classic Doctors, with the exception of the 6th and the 8th, but he appeared with the 6th in Dimensions in Time, which was a sort of like charity special, and he appeared with the 8th in an audio drama. So basically Nicholas Courtney himself has appeared with all of the classic Doctors. Cool. And so, in the exception, obviously, of the first Doctor, because the Brigadier wasn't a character back then.
Right.
But so, and he is basically what Jonathan said, that he's the guy on Earth that the Doctor can trust, and that he trusts the Doctor too, and they work together very well. And he has this very strong military side, which seems very contrary to what the Doctor tries to do, and the Doctor does get frustrated with him sometimes of how military he is. But the Brigadier still trusts the Doctor, still works with the Doctor, and they have this great friendship that develops throughout the whole series.
And I should say, when we say military, this is British 60s, 70s military. This is not American idea of military. This is not Full Metal Jacket general guy. That's not what you have in Britain military. No. This is very dignified, well-spoken, sort of calm and collected military guy, and that's what I think we all love about the character.
And what I love, and I think what's very unique about the Brigadier's character is that he is inherently a skeptic, and yet he knows from his experience that there's so much that he doesn't understand about the world, and that the Doctor does, that he trusts the Doctor. And sometimes, like, I'm also a very big X-Files fan, so it's like, if Scully just, like, didn't question Mulder quite as much as Scully did, and I love that he's a skeptic that still understands that there's more,
Right.
and that sometimes to get stuff done, he just needs to let stuff go and let the Doctor do what the Doctor does without, like, saying that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So anyways, that's the Brigadier, and he comes up again later in the Third Doctor. He's very big in the Third Doctor's run when the Third Doctor's exiled on Earth. But anyway,
so UNIT has a big. I mean, basically most of the invasion is them. Well, actually, the first half of the serial is that Zoe and Isabel Watkins, who is Watkins' daughter, they get captured.
Yeah, they get captured.
And then, of course they get captured. And then, so the first 4 episodes are basically the Doctor working with UNIT to rescue them, and that's at the point where they meet the Cybermen. Yeah. And then the last 4 episodes.
Yeah, it almost kind of feels like a modern day, like in modern day Who, they would have made it a 2-part episode.
Yeah, it's 2 parts, yeah.
Yeah, because it basically ends with the cliffhanger of revealing that the Cybermen are what is working with Tobias Vaughn, and then they go on and fight the Cybermen. And that brings to mind probably the most memorable scene, and it pains me that it's in the 4th episode, which got junked, where they bring in a helicopter with the Doctor and Jamie on the helicopter.
I was going to ask you that. How did they do that in the original series?
That's what I want to know. I've never seen anything like this in the classic series. It seems like they would not nearly have had the budget for it.
But the sound is in there.
Yeah, but they bring in the helicopter, drop a rope ladder down, and get Zoe and Isabel Watkins onto the rope ladder and up, while Packer and his men shoot at them from a distance. And it's like, why couldn't that exist? That's like the most action-packed classic Who gets. Right. Is when they bring in a freaking helicopter. And I was like, really?
Yeah.
Man, that would have been so cool to see.
Yeah. So the invasion is kind of like the Daleks in that a lot of it is like a strategy game between the Doctor and UNIT and Tobias Vaughn.
Yeah, where the Doctor's trying to figure out what Tobias Vaughn's plan is, and he figures out the whole thing with the chips, and that Tobias Vaughn is what you find out what Tobias Vaughn is really doing is he's trying to play against the Cybermen, where he creates, since the Cybermen don't have emotion, they basically cut emotion out from the Cybermen, or else they wouldn't be able to get into these, like, because Cybermen are part human, part organic, or part cybernetic beings, and that their history is that their planet was dying, and they all had to basically, to survive, they had to convert to these cyber forms, and to do that, they had to get rid of their emotions, or else they just wouldn't be able to take it. They wouldn't be able to take being these cybernetic beings. So Tobias Vaughn uses that against them by creating a gun that amplifies emotion in the brain, and that makes the Cybermen go insane. And
it's a great gun.
Yeah. It's so awesome, and that Tobias Vaughn is trying to basically use the Cybermen to make humanity docile, and then fight the Cybermen off and get them off the planet, which he might have actually succeeded in doing.
Yeah.
We don't know. Because the Doctor does kind of interfere, but either way, Tobias Vaughn succeeding wouldn't have been very good for humanity. But Tobias Vaughn thinks that he's doing the right thing.
Yeah. So, and the whole serial does sort of climax with Vaughn teaming up with the Doctor to take down the...
Yeah, and
does Vaughn die at the end?
Yeah, Tobias Vaughn does get killed by a Cyberman at the end of the episode, but there's this great... When the Doctor goes to Tobias Vaughn to say that what we need to do is we need to shut down the signal emitter that's emitting the signal that makes all the humans docile, we have to go shut that down. And so he goes to Tobias Vaughn to try to reason with him, and then Tobias Vaughn figures out that the Cybermen, the Cybermen he thought that were under his control aren't really, and that they're still under the Cyber Command control, and that they're going to go up to kill Tobias Vaughn. And that's when Tobias Vaughn totally snaps, and he says, basically, he tells the Doctor that, like, you think that I want power for my own sake, but that's not why I want power. The world is in disarray. There are too many conflicting ideologies, and I can make it right if I have power. And I'm going to help you, 1, to get the power, and 2, I'm going to help you because I hate the Cybermen. I hate them. Yeah. And that's why I love Tobias Vaughn, is that he's like, he has this, he really does want to power for the sake of helping humanity. That's what he really wants. He thinks he can do that, and he's going to kill the Cybermen because he hates them with a passion. And I love that.
He's probably got more motivation than a B-movie villain would.
Yeah, it's like you figure out he's so much more complex than you assumed he was.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about this serial is that
it's better as it goes along.
Yeah.
And it's 8 episodes, so by the end, I mean, it's really, really good.
Yeah, and you wouldn't think that, like, most of the serials that are this long in the Classic Who series drag a lot. Invasion doesn't drag.
No.
Invasion, because they keep it moving.
Yeah.
Constantly.
I feel in the first 4 are a little long since it's mostly about rescuing the girls, but not. It's not like I regret watching any of it. It's just I feel like the last 4 are better paced, but there's still a lot of fun stuff in those first 4, and I mean, you need it to set the stage for the next 4. So it's good stuff. So, I mean, what else do we want to say about the Invasion?
Spy is Fun is awesome. If you can find the DVD that has the animated episodes, find the DVD. The DVD is awesome. It has a lot of great specials about making the animated stuff.
Yeah. I wanted to say, I have this in my notes and I almost forgot about it. My favorite part is in part 8. So Unit is saves the Doctor, and then it storms the radio tower where Vaughn has just been. And the Doctor is going to get up and run to help when Isabel watches the photographer tries to take a picture. And so instead of resisting, he gets up, fiddles with his collar, and
he's
poses.
Like his bow tie, and he poses. He like has like 3 different poses because Isabella's a photographer that's like documenting all this. She's going up to take the picture, and the Doctor's like just like he fiddles with his bow tie. He like combs his hair down.
It's so
very
funny.
dignified.
And that's what I alluded to this earlier. Patrick Troughton is good at both the funny and the dark side of the Doctor, but he can also switch between it at a moment's notice. And that's one of those scenes because he's just been helping Vaughn take down the Cybermen, and then suddenly it's posing for a picture, and I laughed so hard at that. I had to like pause it because I was missing lines. I thought that was so funny.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff with Patrick Troughton where he's just so good as the Doctor, being able to take the 2 conflicting parts of his personality, like the lighthearted, innocent part, and then the dark, serious, taking care of business part, and he just like melds them and switches between them very well. That's why I love Patrick Troughton that much.
And I also really love the next Doctor we're going to talk about, Doctor number 3.
John Pertwee. John Pertwee is great, and it pains me that people don't bring him up as much as they should. A lot of Whovian fans.
When I watched the episode you chose, and we'll get to it in a second, I thought, I'd never heard much about John Pertwee. No one talks about him. No one mentions him much. You've mentioned him a few times, but even you don't get into him all that much.
Yeah.
So I was like, maybe he's just one of those interim Doctors no one talks about.
He does have a very unique run on the Doctor. His run is very different.
But then I watched him, and it took me maybe an episode to get acclimated to the change between him and Troughton, but that's to be expected with any Doctor. And then I thought he was just phenomenal. Really, really liked John Pertwee.
Yeah, John Pertwee he's so great, and he has a very unique version of the Doctor. And what, like I was saying, his run is very different because what happened is with the end of the War Games, which is Patrick Troughton's last episode, he gets exiled by the Time Lords. And basically...
Forcibly regenerated.
Yeah, forcibly regenerated. And what happened with behind the scenes with the production is kind of like what happened very recently with the switch between Russell T. Davies and Stephen Moffat, where basically the entire production team changed. Like, basically everyone behind the scenes was completely different.
Robert Holmes was... Oh, no, Robert Holmes is new there.
Robert Holmes did write one episode, but he wasn't like the script editor.
Okay.
So it's like they had some of the same writers, but the people actually making the episodes, like the head writer, the script editors, like those people, all that completely changed, like the producers and stuff. So it was a completely new version of Doctor Who, and since he gets exiled on Earth, and that's when he meets up with Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart on Earth, and that's where Unit. Basically, his first 3 seasons, he doesn't really get into the TARDIS almost at all. It's only in the 3 Doctors episode that he gets control of the TARDIS back. It's like the TARDIS is there, but he doesn't have the dematerialization circuit, so he can't get it to work. So it's like he sometimes uses it basically as a lab, working to help Unit fight off against Autons and Zygons and Daleks and Cybermen. So
I'd like to watch all those, because that sounds like an interesting set of episodes.
Yeah, it's very different, and so they're all set on Earth, and I think it's very important because it does kind of it does give you more of the sense of why the Doctor loves humans as much as he does, and why he keeps on coming back to humans.
Because he spent all that time there.
He spent like 5 years with the Brigadier in the 70s or maybe the 80s or whoever knows, fighting against the Master and everything. Oh, and this is the first time the Master comes up. His second season is basically all just him fighting against the Master.
Okay.
So,
but the episode you picked is from after he got the TARDIS back.
Yeah, it's right after it's the first episode of his last season, right after he loses his long-standing companion, Joe Grant, and it's the first episode of new long-standing companion, Sarah Jane Smith, who's basically the longest-standing companion aside from the Brigadier.
Yeah, in the series history.
Yeah, in the series history.
This is The Time Warrior by Robert Holmes.
And Robert Holmes, for those of you uninitiated in classic Doctor Who,
is a genius.
Yeah, he's basically the classic Doctor Who version of Stephen Moffat now, where every single one of his episodes are absolutely phenomenal. And so, if you can't go wrong with a Robert Holmes episode of classic Doctor Who.
And this is the other thing, is the revived series, they talk about him. Like, the writers of it talk about him.
Yeah, like, he was a huge inspiration for Russell T. Davies in remaking the show.
The one we're going to talk about with the Fourth Doctor is one by Robert Holmes that Russell T. Davies does specifically cite as inspiration for his take on it.
I saw that quote as well. Yeah.
So, cool stuff. But this is The Time Warrior. I will say right now, of all the classic ones I've watched so far for this podcast, this is my favorite one. I totally understand. I love this one so much.
This is one of the ones where, like, I was talking about how they got rid of purely historical episodes, but they had historical, like, episodes set in Earth's past, but it had science fiction elements, and this is one of the first stories that use that kind of format.
And that's one of my favorite kinds.
I think it's, when it's done well, it's about as good as it gets, which is why I believe the next one is basically like that too. Yeah. But for Jon Pertwee, this is also the introduction, the very first episode that features the Sontarans. And the Sontarans are one of my favorite races. And I think they're probably my favorite example of that, like, science fiction trope where you have an alien race that's dedicated, like, purely to war and are warriors, like basically the Klingons.
And they're very self-centered, too.
Yeah, and I for some reason, the Sontarans it always is more believable for me that the Sontarans would be like that. I don't know why, with their just like their design and how they act. Like, they're a clone race, so they're all basically bred purely for the reason of fighting the Rootans. Yeah. And you figure out what the Rootans are later, but
so this is the Sontarans' first appearance. This is a much simpler one than the others to explain. It doesn't have, like, 200 plot ships.
This is when Doctor Who got railed back to basically almost all of them were 4-part serials. And every season would have a 6-part serial.
This is one of the reasons I love this one, too, is that in 4 parts, they don't waste a second.
Yeah,
and it just
Robert Holmes is so good at filling his time perfectly.
Right.
And so basically what happens is the Doctor figures out he's working for UNIT, working with the Brigadier, and there's these reports of these scientists that are going missing. So the Doctor goes to figure out what's happening, and there's a brief appearance by the Brigadier at the beginning of the episode.
That's the only time you see him.
Yeah, that's the only time you see him. And Sarah Jane Smith is there as an investigative reporter, and pretending to be her aunt Lavinia, who's like a botanist or something like that, who's supposed to actually be there, but she's in America. So Sarah Jane Smith is there investigating, and the Doctor figures out that these people are being taken out of time and back into the past, and that the Doctor traces it. And there's actually this really funny scene at the beginning where he says he's building this little, like, device, and Sarah Jane's there, and it's like, "What are you making?" He says, "I'm making an alarm clock." And it's like, "Oh, be serious." "No, I'm serious. It detects delta particles." It's like, "Why?" "Because I like delta particles." And then Sarah Jane walks away, and then you see that then it cuts, and the Doctor's sleeping, and then all of a sudden this machine just goes beep 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 beep, and he, like, picks it up, and he's like, it actually was an alarm clock. He really was using it as an alarm clock, so you could wake up and when these delta particles came up, so he could track the disturbance time and find out where the Sontaran is. And I love that scene.
And this is a good point to point out. That is kind of defining of Jon Pertwee, I feel.
Yeah.
In that he's a different kind of Doctor, in that he's extremely matter-of-fact.
Yeah.
I think he has some of Troughton's whimsical and like, lightheartedness to him, because he's very nice and compassionate. But he is older and more obviously calculating and intellectual.
Yeah, and he's slightly standoffish to new people. Like with Sarah Jane Smith, he's not immediately just totally friendly to her. He actually, he kind of uses other people as a joke, like further jokes. Like, that's where his whimsical side comes across.
Yeah.
Is where he's almost kind of like a practical joker, only with his words instead of actual actions.
But like I was saying, he's very obviously calculating and smart and wise, whereas Troughton...
Yeah, he doesn't try to, like, conceal it at all.
Troughton hid those things sometimes.
To, like, and use it to his advantage to put off the people he's trying to trick.
Yeah, but Pertwee is always... I mean, he's one of the more
he's
obviously intellectual ones.
Like, more serious, matter-of-fact doctors, which I
love.
I love about him. And then, so he goes back in time, and he finds out that there's eventually he finds out what's happening is that the Sontaran Lynx has been separated from his Sontaran battle fleet, and he's crash landed on Earth, and he's taken refuge in this fort occupied by, and this is where we're talking about pairs of Doctor Who, and this is almost kind of like a triplet, or like two different like pairs of people, but you've got these side characters where the guy running the who has the castle and took it over is this barbarian named Iron Grom.
Yep.
And then he has what I love is his assistant, who's this like he's this very nice, he's this very kiss-ass sort of assistant, and his name is Bloodaxe.
Yeah.
And it's like, I just love Bloodaxe because he's like so impressed with Iron Grom's like meager intelligence.
Yeah.
Whenever Iron Grom comes up with an idea, and like it's just like, come along, Bloodaxe. Like I just love Bloodaxe so much.
I like Bloodaxe, and Iron Grom is hilarious because he thinks he's so great.
Yeah, he thinks he's so great, but he's dealing with a freaking Sontaran.
Yeah. But I think that's so funny. He never once in this serial figures out the threat he's up against.
Yeah.
But so he always acts against the Sontaran like he's the big man on campus, and he is the king, you know. But the Sontaran is almost like brushes him off every time.
Yeah.
He's one step ahead of him. He doesn't care about Iron Grand except he's using Iron Grand. So the Sontaran and Iron Grand sort of form a alliance.
Yeah, where the Iron Grand allows him to set up basically shop in the dungeon of his castle so that Lynx can work. And then Lynx provides for Iron Grom some like basic like flintlock rifles and stuff, and then eventually
a robot.
Yeah, he makes this like fighting robot that's really, really funny. It's just like it's this like suit of armor, and it just has a sword that just like swings up and down and just walks forward. There's a great scene where Iron Grom tries to use that to execute this archer who's infiltrated his base,
but it doesn't go so well
because John Pertwee is on the scene.
Yes, so. There's lots. I love all the characters in this. Sarah Jane gets lots of cool stuff to do. It's interesting to see her origins because we all know how Sarah Jane would end up, as one of the longest-standing companions. But to see her in this role where she initially doesn't trust the Doctor,
yeah, she distrusts the Doctor and thinks the Doctor's actually behind what's happening.
Right,
that's kind of understandable.
Yeah,
the guy with the magic time traveler's box.
Right. And it's a cool dynamic. But basically, the whole thing is Iron Grand is at war with another castle, and they end up helping the other castle in this scenario.
To try to get rid of Lynx and try to get the scientists that Lynx is bringing back in time to work on to fix his ship and send them back into their present time.
But let's talk about Lynx for a minute because he was one of my favorite parts of this serial.
Lynx is great.
He's such a great the Sontarans. I don't think of them necessarily having as much personality as Lynx does.
Yeah,
so
Lynx
cool.
is like the quintessential Sontaran because he's the first one. And he's kind of like what a lot of the other ones are based on. It reminds in the Revive series the General Stahl, I believe, in the Sontaran episodes, he's like kind of like
Lynx.
He's got a lot of personality in that it's like they're not only just like mindless warriors, kind of like the Klingons are. It's like they use a lot of strategy. Yeah. They have this very strategic way of thinking about stuff that's much more realistic to a warrior race than would just like, I'm just going to go out and just like kill shit.
Yeah, and his voice is the best part.
Yeah,
he's got such a cool voice. And the makeup on the Sontaran at that time, that's incredibly advanced.
Yeah, for the time. It doesn't look like if you like switch between the Revive show and that, it looks like shit. But back in the day, man,
because when they took off his helmet, I'd never seen a classic Sontaran, so they take off his helmet. I'm like, oh, I'm bracing myself, and then like, wait, that looks fine. That
doesn't look bad at all.
Yeah, so I was surprised. That's good stuff. But there's not much to say about this one except it's a really good story.
Although one thing I do want to bring up about John Pertwee that like I kind of miss from the recent Doctors, and I think they're kind of trying to bring it back from what I've like seen with interviews with Matt Smith a little bit, is that he's much more action oriented and that the Doctor actually fights people.
Right.
And
I was going to say that.
He has
that move.
Yeah, he has this like Venusian Aikido is what he calls it, and like he has all these. He basically uses karate to fight people, and it reminds me of kind of like 1930s pulp stuff, like The Shadow, where he has like this like he's this well-spoken, very distinguished English gentleman with this like sort of knowledge of Oriental like mysticism kind of aspect with it. And I just love he like can like paralyze people by sticking two fingers on their chest, just kind of like the Vulcan neck pinch on the chest. And there's a few times when he like flips people over in this episode.
Yeah, it's fun.
He just has this much more action oriented. Like he doesn't kill people, but he uses necessary force, I think, to like disable them. And I think it's very well done, and it's an aspect of the Doctor I kind of wish they would bring back because I miss it a lot.
It's cool. The other thing I wanted to talk about with John Pertwee before we move on to the Fourth Doctor is his costume.
Oh, yes.
here's what I feel about Doctor Who costumes in general, is that they're very formal. He wears, except for maybe Christopher Eccleston, who wears a leather jacket, all of them wear very formal clothing, but it seems like it's practical clothing that would be easy to get on and off and use and stuff. When I watched this one with John Pertwee, I love his costume because it is so different, but it looks way too frilly and over the top to be practical. Yeah, he's got basically a tuxedo and a shirt with the frills and everything.
Yeah, and he's got like a little cloak and stuff.
Yeah,
and actually his outfit changes the most. Like it's the same style, but the actual article of clothing, because you know how like the doctors have more than one shirt and stuff, but they're basically the same general style. His very more than any other doctor.
Okay,
but I had that very kind of Victorian gentleman. Like the cloak and the frilly shirts and stuff.
Yeah. That's just what struck me, is it's it would be out of place no matter what time zone he's in. That's my thing. I think the Doctor wears what he wears because it's usually consistent no matter where he is in the universe. His nice clothes, I would say the 10th Doctor's outfit might be the epitome of this in that it looks kind of good no matter where he is.
Yeah.
But I mean, Troughton's is like that, Matt Smith's is like that, William Hartnell's is like that to an extent.
Yeah.
Tom Baker, the scarf maybe a little too much, but yeah.
But it's basically it's
this
just is they're wearing clothes and it's
right.
just basically.
But this one, I don't know a time period when that would look right.
It's kind of it does kind of fit in with a Victorian era British gentleman, but it is a little more.
Yeah.
Well, it's in the Three Doctors, which is a crossover where the first, second, and third Doctors all meet. When the first Doctor sees the second and third Doctors, he says, "Oh, these are my replacements, a dandy and a clown."
Nice.
Where John Pertwee's the dandy and Patrick Troughton's the clown. And I love that scene. It's he just basically sums up both the Doctors in one word.
Dandy and clown. Well, speaking of a dandy and a clown, we should move on to the fourth Doctor.
Yes, the longest standing Doctor, running for 7 years.
And
Tom Baker.
Tom Baker. I think he's still the most iconic.
Yeah.
I think we can debate whether he's whether or not he's the best and all that. But he's certainly the most recognizable, except I think today David Tennant has probably overtaken him for casual fans.
With new Who fans, they would be... It's he's basically the David Tennant of the classic series.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, because this is the area where now David Tennant would have started watching the show with Tom Baker and then into Peter Davison.
Yeah. So, and I know David Tennant will say he got a lot more from Peter Davison. I haven't watched his one yet. But
I had kind of defined David Tennant's Doctor as sort of an amalgam of the fourth and the fifth, with a little bit of the sixth in near the end of his run when he's getting more arrogant. We can talk about that later.
Yeah. Anyway, but Tom Baker and the Talons of Wang Chiang by Robert Holmes.
Yeah, it's another Robert Holmes story. Yeah, he'll come up again. But so this one is another one of the historicals with the science fiction aspect, where it's taking place in late 19th century London.
Victorian.
Yeah, and he it's got this and this was the era when Sherlock Holmes was being written, and it has a very Sherlock Holmes theme to it, where the Doctor, to the extent where the Doctor dresses like Sherlock Holmes.
Great costume.
Yeah, it really does fit Tom Baker a lot, where I almost feel like maybe Tom Baker should have been if it was today, it would almost be like Tom Baker should have been playing the Doctor and Sherlock Holmes in the new Sherlock series too. It's he's a really good Sherlock Holmes and a really good Doctor.
Right.
Because it almost felt like in this that he was playing the Doctor, playing Sherlock Holmes in some scenes.
That's what I liked what he was doing with this, is that you can tell the Doctor is making fun of the stuff going on, even.
Yeah.
Because he even says stuff like "elementary, my dear."
Yeah.
Whoever.
Leela.
Well, I know, but there are other characters he said it to. So.
Elementary, my dear Lightfoot.
Lightfoot, that's the one. We'll get to all of them. But I was going to say the setting of this is one of my favorite things about this serial, in that the atmosphere is awesome.
Yeah.
The sets are amazing. The way...
sort of foggy London streets.
The actors they chose to do the side characters so that it feels so authentic.
Yeah.
Yes, this is Victorian, a late 19th century England. And it's almost over the top at times, but it works really well. So
yeah, and so basically, and actually, we should address the only single complaint that I've ever seen about this serial is that
it's kind of racist.
Yeah, it's pretty racist against Chinese, but also you need to notice that they were racist against Chinese people during this time period.
Yeah.
So it's
the only one that actually did get on my nerves, if you want to say that, is that the Doctor says one kind of racist thing, and I feel like the Doctor should never have anything like that. And that's the only place where it gets out of history, I feel.
Yeah.
Because I don't think the Doctor would say that. But other than that, it's not bad, and Unless you consider the guy who plays Chang isn't actually Chinese.
But it's
I
like
that later.
But it's kind of like watching a John Ford Western with Native Americans. It's like, but you have to accept that like that's what was happening, and you have to get past that.
It's not intentionally writing this to demonize the Chinese either. So, it works for what it is very, very well.
I mean, and you have to notice it also. I mean, because there are complaints about all the Chinese characters are bad people. It's like, but they're a gang. It's a gang of Chinese people. It's not just like random Chinese people walking down the street. This is an organized, basically triad gang.
Yeah, and that still happens today in lots of crime stories.
Yeah,
because the triad is a big deal, and there are Chinese gangs, and that's
So that's something that that kind of bugged me when I saw that complaint. It's like,
all right, but before we move on any further with the discussion of the talents of Wang Chiang, I feel we need to go over Tom Baker as the Doctor.
Okay, yeah, that's...
And let me start with my impression of him, because this is the only one of his I've watched, because it was the one you gave me to watch. And I feel like I need to watch, probably a full season of Tom Baker before I can make a definitive, verdict on him. My initial impression was he's the most different of all of them, except maybe initially William Hartnell. From the ones I've seen so far, he takes a big deviation. He's got some of Troughton and Pertwee in him, I think, but I really did like Tom Baker a lot. But sort of the things I wrote is that he's kind of distant. He's a little cold. He doesn't have the same sort of, I feel like, hands-on approach like Troughton and Pertwee took to the character, in that he seems like he's always one layer away from us, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no. Well,
and he's really, really funny, and he can be very badass. And he's very in control all the time, and he can be, funny or frivolous, and that's obviously been an influence on other Doctors. Yeah. But like I said, he is a very different kind of Doctor. He's also, I think, one of the most overtly wise ones, in that
he feels old.
Yeah,
right?
He does feel old, and that layer away from us he is some of his wisdom, and I think that's one of the things. People say a lot with Matt Smith that he took a lot from Patrick Troughton. I also think he took more from Tom Baker than some people maybe say sometimes. In that thing where he is so wise and old. And I think, he got some of that from how... And in those moments, Matt Smith does the same thing where he's suddenly very alien and away. And that's something Tom Baker does. He's the most alien of the Doctors.
Yeah, that's one of the things that... when you said that, you have to watch a whole season, I kind of felt the same way, because Tom Baker was a Doctor I was somewhat familiar with. But after I had gone through all of the first three Doctors, I was so into what they were, and that Tom Baker is a big jump. And going through his first season, where his first story, Robots, is basically just a John Pertwee story, but Tom Baker's there, which is kind of jarring because you don't get a good feel for who he is as the Doctor. Yeah. But then there's this 3-part episode that starts with the Ark in Space, and I believe all 3 parts are written by Robert Holmes. And 3-part episode, I mean 3 serials that kind of compose generally one story, but each one kind of has its own thing going on. And it's over the course of those that you get who Tom Baker is as a Doctor and who the 4th Doctor is. And that's when it does start where it's almost like he's starting to feel his age, kind of. Yeah. Where he's gone through, in all of these journeys as the first 3 Doctors, he's gone through so much. And this is when you start getting lines where he's kind of acknowledging how old he is. He says one time to Sarah Jane, it's I'm a Time Lord. I walk in eternity, and you're just one moment. Yeah. And it's and there's a lot of stuff where he can be very brooding and grandiose like that. But then also, and this is kind of where he's very similar to David Tennant, where he has a lot of brooding moments. When he's out doing stuff, he still has this very childlike enthusiasm, and he's so happy, and he's smiling all the time when he's out.
He has the funniest smile.
He has the greatest smile, and combination with he has these bulging eyes whenever he smiles, and these great teeth, and it's just it's the picture of happiness whenever he smiles.
Yep, and I should say, I knew when Sean was watching Tom Baker episodes because he would always come to debate tournaments in school doing a Tom Baker impression, including the big smile and the wide eyes and the funny voice.
Well, you can't exactly avoid it, can you? It's very fun, actually.
Yeah.
He's got a very unique voice.
Yes, he does. So, I would say so far, watching just this one, I feel like I need to watch more. I didn't like him as much as John Pertwee or Patrick Troughton. Maybe that would change if I watched more.
Yeah,
where do you rank him among them?
It's so hard for me to rank Like a lot of Whovians spend so much time trying to rank doctors.
Yeah, I don't
that
condone
like,
ranking doctors. Like, that's not what I meant. I don't like
but
doing
it's
that,
like,
but
and it's really because every time I try, I'm like, I'm going to sit down and like think of like, because I know that Patrick Troughton is my personal favorite. I love Patrick Troughton. Then as soon as I get, who's my second favorite, I'm like, well, I really love the Seventh Doctor. He's great. Well, no, Matt Smith is also, I love him so much, but he's only had one series. But Tom Baker's awesome. Yeah. It's like, I can't get past.
Right. I'm that way too, where I know who my favorite is, and we'll get to that when we get to it. But then when I start thinking of the other ones, I have no cons really, but mostly pros for all of them, and they're kind of like all tied for 2.
Yeah, it's like I can't possibly, if like chips down, I'd probably say Seventh is my second favorite, Matt Smith is my third favorite, and Tom Baker would be my fourth, I guess. I don't.
Yeah.
It's like he's definitely up there in one of my favorite doctors, though.
Okay, that's all I was asking.
Yeah, it's like, and you have to. I do think it's hard jumping in because he is, as you said, so aloof and so alien.
That's the word I was looking for. Aloof. That's a good one.
It's like you have to get to know who he is because he doesn't just go out and he doesn't outright tell you. And Matt Smith had a lot of that too, which was kind of a bad idea for him. Although, I mean, I love his portrayal of the Doctor, but David Tennant was such a rabidly loved Doctor that for him to...
Very populist, too.
Him acting so aloof, I think I love his portrayal of the Doctor, and I would never want him to change it at all. But that made so many Doctor Who fans, well, not David Tennant fans, I should say, just would not accept Matt Smith as the Doctor.
Well, and actually, I mean, it's a lot on the internet. In reality, people love Matt Smith. Yeah, there's a small contingent of fans, but the
David Tennant fangirls of the world.
Yeah, I mean, most people have made that transition and accepted it. Especially because I'm one of those fans who I like when the new Doctor comes up and I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I love it.
There were so many people when David Tennant left. They were like, "We don't want him to leave. We're not going to accept whoever." Like Matt Smith was fighting a losing battle against those people, no matter what he did. He could have done a David Tennant impersonation, and they would have hated it. You know. So anyway.
We'll get to that when we talk about the Revive series.
Yeah, but so that's Tom Baker. But what's Talons of Wayne Chiang about?
So briefly, it's about basically in a person who from the future, a guy named Magnus Greel, goes back into the past, and he's kind of basically immortal through using this machine that allows him to suck the life basically out of other people, and he also has this assistant Chang, who's also basically immortal, and he's using his technology. He's given him some like mild telekinetic powers and stuff like that, where he can read people's minds and hypnotize them. And right now he's trying to get back this device he used to travel back in time because he's one of the first humans to invent time travel from the 51st century.
It's a time cabinet.
Yes, it's a time cabinet, which is also basically what the Daleks used for a little while. But anyways, when Magnus Greel, he tracks down his time cabinet to London, where a man named Professor Lightfoot has possession of this time cabinet. It's been his family for a very long time, and it's Magnus Greel trying to get it back and using Chang and Chang's little Mr. Sin, the Tibetan like homunculus thing, to try to get his time cabinet back. And the Doctor, and so Chang is capturing. While this is happening, Chang is capturing young women because Magnus Greel is rapidly decaying and using them to feed his life force, which is what gets the Doctor onto his path because there's this string of missing women. And they think it's with the time period, they think it might be Jack the Ripper. Yeah. Too. So
and it's kind of a Sherlock Holmes story for the Doctor, and that's a mystery he's piecing together.
Yeah, he's trying to piece together.
And what I would say is, Sean just gave you a really, really good summary of the serial, but it's 6 parts. You don't piece that all together until the end.
Yeah,
of
you don't
part 6.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
You figure out, the Doctor figures out that the thing is used, what the time cabinet is, and like this little key that the time cabinet uses. He figures out what those are, but he doesn't tell anybody right away.
Right, and so it's interesting in that way because it's such a complex story. Now we can say it really quickly because we've seen it.
Knowing what happens at the end.
When you watch it, it takes a while to piece together, and that's one of those things that Robert Holmes, I feel, is good at in writing those complicated stories.
He builds suspense and mystery very well.
And I feel like that is probably this kind of episode. I would say I've seen influence on this in how Stephen Moffat writes things, especially with how he uses time travel in this one. And it's subtle, but the idea that the time cabinet was sent back but was in this guy's family for years, Stephen Moffat does stuff like that all the time.
Yeah.
And I assume he got that from Robert Holmes in this kind of story.
Yeah, a lot of classic Doctor Who didn't play with time travel that much, but Robert Holmes definitely does it a lot more. Like with the Time Warrior, Sondheim's pulling people out of time and stuff like that, where he uses the time travel as a story mechanism a lot more than most other classic Doctor Who writers did.
Yeah. So I like seeing stuff like that. But the main villain, for all intents and purposes in this, until you get to... Magnus Greel doesn't really enter the picture in a big way until the last two or so. But it's this guy named Chang, Lee Sen Chang, who is awesome.
Yeah, no, even though it is kind of distracting once you realize that it's actually a British person playing a Chinese guy, but he does it very well.
I actually didn't know that until I looked it up on Wikipedia, and then I felt like I
figured it out about... I should have noticed it about... There's some, like, line he said that I noticed about the fourth episode that's like... That wasn't... He didn't say it quite right, but for going through 4 episodes and me not noticing that, that's, like... Yeah, that's very impressive that he was able to...
He's got a cool accent.
Yeah, he does it very well, and he's... I love his character that, like... Well, now we need to get into my 2 favorite side characters in this are Jago and Lightfoot, where Jago is the man running the theater that Li Shen Chang is, like, doing this, performing at, using his magic that he's using to get money. And then Lightfoot is sort of the Watson-type character, and he has the time cabinet, and he's a coroner at the for Scotland Yard. And so, basically, what I love is, like, Jago is Jago totally buys into the detective thing because he meets Tom Baker because Tom Baker's the doctor's investigating all the disappearances, and he basically tracks it down to Chang because he recognizes Chang from when he was in China once, which I thought that was a really because Chang is very, very old and the doctor recognizes him.
That was a cool touch.
Yeah, that was a cool little scene when he sees Li Sen Chang for the first time. So he goes. He goes to Jago's theater and pretends that he's going to try to work at the theater doing magic, and he does a few little cute magic tricks. And then he hypnotizes Jago, because Jago's under the control of Li Sen Chang the entire time, figures out kind of what's been going on with Li Sen Chang, kidnapping the women, and then he basically tells Jago that he is working for Scotland Yard and that he's a detective. So he basically lies to him, and he says, I'm working for the police. And so Jago totally buys into this whole detective thing.
He never figures it out.
Yeah, and I love, because he makes the Sherlock Holmes thing work as well as it does, I think, for the last basically 3 episodes because it's his enthusiasm for working with this, like, this consulting detective with Scotland Yard, and it's like, he talks about how, it's like, well, how is he going to find us? Well, the fleck of paint there, he'll find us somehow. It's just, he has such confidence in the doctor's deductive reasoning where he's obviously read, like, detective stories and stuff. And I love Jago's character so much.
Yeah. Jago and Lightfoot were a bit too much for me. Like, I thought there was too much Jago, because he's kind of comic relief in a lot of it. And I understand, like, everything you just said. I like, agree with it, maybe not to the same extent, but I thought sometimes he and Lightfoot's interactions were too over the top, and it kind of got too much by the end for me. But, I understand why you would have liked it.
Yeah, no, because at the end, Jago and Lightfoot team up while the doctor's off doing what the doctor does, and they track down where Magnus Greel is, and they get captured.
That's where it became too much for me.
Yeah, and that's the part where I like, because although this is like the only instance of padding I think in the whole serial is really when they escape for the first time, and they go down the dumbwaiter and they escape, and then they just get captured immediately. It's like, okay, that was just kind of whatever. Yeah. But I think I like the interaction between Jago and Lightfoot as characters, where Lightfoot he's this much more practical doctor, and is basically like operating as the stoic Watson type character, working with this basically a buffoon who is Jago. And I love the interaction between their characters while the doctor was trying to figure out what really was going on.
Yeah. So, I didn't like them as much, but I liked most of this serial. Tell me about, though, Leela, because she doesn't do much in this one, so she kind of was an enigma to me. Like, I didn't really understand everything.
Yeah, so Leela's the companion he gets after Sarah Jane Smith, and basically her backstory is she's from humanity's future, and she is a human, and she's the product of, like, this spaceship crash-landed on a planet, and basically, like, 2 groups of because it was a colony ship, and two groups of people basically originated from that. And one group had to go off into the forest, and they became these like savages. And they were called the Team, which was like just a corruption of the word survey team. And then on the ship there were these scientists, and eventually Tom Baker, the doctor materializes on the planet and does all this stuff, corrects what has happened, figures out that these people through the years have forgotten that they are humanity, that they came from Earth, and all this stuff, like fixes all these problems. And then Leela, who was one of the savages, comes with him. And Leela is one of my least favorite companions because I don't think she doesn't do much. She doesn't fit that well, I think, with the Doctor.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
She's a very action-oriented companion, which never worked for me because of the actress Louise Jameson. Like, she's pretending to know how to fight. I'm like, nobody would fight like that. And it just really bugged me every time Leela was trying to be badass.
And Leela seemed like she was an incompetent fighter to me, too. In the last episode, she has a chance to kill Magnus Greel. And instead of just stabbing him,
she
announces.
Yeah, she announces what she's going to do.
And she jumps on him and tries to, talk to him first. And I'm like, why didn't you just stab him?
Yeah, I think it's more egregious nowadays. I think the characterization would have worked better when the episodes were made. But nowadays, I agree. I don't like Leela as a companion much, and she probably is the worst part of the episode for me.
And I know
because she doesn't even. There's no reason for Leela to even be there. Really,
no,
she doesn't do anything for the substance of the story.
I know I was reading this on her Wikipedia article. Tom Baker actually didn't like the character either of Leela.
Yeah, no.
And I thought that was interesting to see. And he kind of rebelled against it for a while until he finally made friends with the actress.
Yeah.
But I don't know if he ever came to terms with the character, and she wasn't around as long as Sarah Jane.
Yeah, no, I think she only lasted 1.5 seasons.
Yeah. So, I mean, what else do we want to talk about in this episode?
Well, let's talk about the ending of it with basically the last scene where the Doctor finally confronts Magnus Greel. I really love that scene where they're in his big palace. Basically, Magnus Greel has the time cabinet, has the time key, and they're playing chess. And that's when Magnus Greel finds out that the Doctor's from the future, and that the Doctor, and there's all this stuff that you never see any of this, but the Doctor's talking about all this stuff that happened, this march on Reykjavik, and Magnus Greel is this mad scientist from the future who is doing all these experiments with time and stuff like that don't really pan out and that only basically destroy stuff. And the Doctor's trying to explain to him that what he's doing doesn't work, that what he's doing is going to destroy him. But Magnus Greel won't accept that. Magnus Greel keeps on thinking that he's a genius and that what he's figured out is going to work no matter what. And the Doctor's pleading for him to not go through with it.
It's a really good scene.
Yeah, because the time cabinet will destroy Magnus Greel if he gets inside it and tries to use it. And the Doctor's keeps on telling him, you cannot do this. I'm from the future. I know you're insane, but don't do this. You're going to kill yourself. And I love this scene because it also sets up. It's a kind of an aside, basically, the small sentence where Magnus Greel thinks at first that the Doctor's a time agent from the 51st century, and that small sentence sets up for the revived series the character Captain Jack Harkness.
I actually have all that written here, and I was going to mention it. Yeah.
Now, where Captain Jack Harkness is a time agent from the 51st century.
Yeah.
And that's one of the few consistent things about Doctor Who chronology.
Yeah.
The fact that the 51st century is where humanity developed rudimentary time travel for a little bit.
Yep. That's cool that they paid attention to that.
Yeah, but just because I think it's because that scene is so. And I was just talking about Robert Holmes is so influential on the episodes, and that scene is so well written.
Yeah.
Where you never have seen all these adventures that the Doctor's talking about, where he was fighting against these experiments in humanity's future, but you still feel like you were there, regardless. The way it's written is so well done.
And I always love those allusions to where the Doctor's been when we didn't see him, because it makes him feel even larger than life than he already is.
Yeah.
I love that. So, but tell me, why is this one specifically your favorite Tom Baker story?
Well, I would say because one, it is so smartly written. Two, I love Sherlock Holmes. I've read basically all the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I love detective fiction. Also, and you disagree with me on this, but I really love Jago and Lightfoot.
Yeah.
I think they're really well done. And then also, I think the science fiction parts of it are so good. The science fiction part of I love the idea of this mad scientist from the future coming back in time and using his knowledge from the future to try to keep himself alive to try to get his technology back so he can go back.
It's a good story.
Yeah.
I do agree. I didn't love it. I liked it, though. I'd like to see more of Tom Baker. And that might be a thing, though. If I were to watch his run in order and I got to this, I would probably like it, appreciate it a lot more than I do right now.
Yeah.
So, I will tell you, though, what my favorite part of the episode is. My favorite line is at the very end. It's one of Tom Baker's last lines in the episode is, he says to them, "Come, I'll buy you some muffins." And I don't know how, but Baker makes that line so cool.
Oh,
how does he do it? How does he make it so awesome?
Yeah, no, he has a few lines like that throughout the series, but like I remember, I love that part where they've gone through all this crazy stuff. Like we didn't even really touch on Mr. Sin, the homunculus.
Oh yeah,
I really love that. It's like this crazy little like monster. It's like basically a robot with a pig brain inside of it that goes insane.
Yeah,
and at the end, basically it kills Magnus Greel and it's trying to kill all of them. And eventually, they shoot it and then destroy it. And so it's after all this crazy shit has gone down, and then the doctor's like, "Do you hear that?" And Jacob says, "What?" And it's like, "The Muffin Man. I'll buy you a muffin." And I just love, it's just like all this insanity has just gone down. And it's like, it's gone throughout like the entire night. And then the doctor's like, oh, let's go get some muffins.
Yeah, it's crazy. I love that part. And Mr. Sin, he's basically a midget robot thing.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting. He was played by Deep Roy, who's very famous now because he's had a lot of small person roles.
Yeah.
And especially, probably his most notable one is in Tim Burton's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. He plays all the Oompa Loompas.
Oh yeah.
But everyone knows who Deep Roy is by now. But that's cool that this was one of his first roles ever, I think, was on Doctor Who.
It's a crazy pig monster.
Yeah, kind of weird. So, I guess we've gone through the first 4 Doctors. So that's it for part 1 of our podcast. Next Sunday, 1 week from today, we're going to be recording and releasing part 2. This is where we're going to finish up the classic series. We're going to talk about the 5th, 6th, 7th Doctors, and the 8th Doctor, who has just the one appearance in the movie.
The TV movie.
But, Sean has actually gone through a lot of the stuff between the movie and then the revived series. So we'll talk about some of that history. And then for part 3, which will be 2 weeks from today, we'll go through the revived series. Have a lot to say about all that. I don't know if they'll all be as long as this one. We're clocking in at about 2.5 hours right now. So we'll see once I edit that down how that gets down.
We'll no more like 7 and 8 part episodes left. So
yeah, that's a good thing. So I think we're all looking forward to that. Is there anything else you want to say?
I don't think so. Goodbye.
Yeah, I guess to be continued. Just imagine that we are standing here and a Dalek is approaching us in the classic cliffhanger shot.
Yeah, I miss the like. I love every time there's a 2-part episode that they always have like one of those classic Doctor Who cliffhangers.
The best one is still for the revived. I think it's Series 5. Matt Smith makes the speech with the angels and then fires the gun, and you know what's going to happen.
But like I miss like. Because back in the day, all the serials were like multiple episodes. It's like every single one had to end with a cliffhanger, and sometimes they had to reach so far to get those cliffhangers, and then it's like what happened just like immediately dropped. It's like you really had to shoot in a cliffhanger there.
Yep, and actually, Robert Holmes is good at it though. And in Wing Chiang, there are some great ones. I love the one where she rips off. It's the last cliffhanger of the show. She rips off Greel's mask. That's a really good one. Yeah, they kind of drop it immediately, but the cliffhanger is just seeing the grotesqueness of his face. That's a good, simple one, because it's not really dropped. It's a good shock moment. But anyway, speaking of shock moment,